code was shit. 2 in the morning, and the same line of PHP mocked me from the screen. A single stubborn bug stood between me and sleep. The client's deadline was a gun to my head. My entire world had shrunk to the blue glow of the monitor, the stale taste of cold coffee on my tongue, and the low hum of the desktop fan. I hated freelance work. I hated this client. I hated this line of code. I leaned back, the cheap office chair groaning in protest. My apartment was on the 7th floor of a building that had seen better days. The kind of place with thin walls and plumbing that sang at all hours. The perks of urban solitude, I guess. No one to bother you, no one to hear you scream. Click. It was a tiny sound, sharp and out of place. It came from the direction of the sliding glass door that led to my small balcony. I scowled, not really taking my eyes off the screen. Probably a tree branch. The wind picks up at this height. This crumbling excuse for a high-rise was always making noises. I shoved my headphones back on, cranking up the lo-fi playlist until the outside world dissolved into a muffled beat. Problem first, everything else later. 20 minutes crawled by. The bug remained, invincible. My eyes burned. My brain felt like a sponge, wrung out and useless. I finally gave up, pushing away from the desk. I needed water. Or maybe something stronger. I pulled the headphones off, dropping them on the cluttered desk. The sudden silence of the apartment pressed in. It felt heavier than usual. That's when I heard it again. Click, click, click. This time, it wasn't from the balcony. It was from the front door. And it wasn't random. It was deliberate, rhythmic. 3 distinct, metallic sounds, spaced a second apart. Hold on. The frustration from the code evaporated, replaced by a cold prickle on the back of my neck. That wasn't the wind. That wasn't the building settling. My tired brain snapped to attention. I stopped dead in the hallway, halfway to the kitchen. I listened. Every muscle in my body tensed. Nothing. Just the hum of the refrigerator. Who would be at my door at 2:20 a.m.? No one. I live alone. I work alone. I don't get visitors, especially not at this hour. My heart started a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. Annoyance was quickly turning into something else, something ugly. I turned from the kitchen and started towards the front door. I moved slowly, my bare feet silent on the cold laminate floor. Each step was a conscious effort not to make a sound. I reached the door, my hand hovering over the deadbolt. It was locked. I always lock it. I checked it twice before sitting down to work. Still, I placed my fingers on it. Solid. Secure. I leaned forward, my breath fogging the small glass of the peephole. I put my eye to it. The hallway outside was lit by a single, flickering fluorescent light at the far end. It was empty. The patterned, stained carpet was the same as always. The door to 7B across the hall was closed. No one there. Absolutely no one. Maybe someone on the wrong floor? A drunk neighbor? It had to be. A wave of relief washed over me. So strong it almost made me dizzy. I was just tired. Jumpy from too much caffeine and not enough sleep. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Stupid. Blaise. Blaise. I nearly jumped out of my skin. The vibration against my thigh was like an electric shock. My phone. I fumbled it out of my pocket. My hand shaking. The screen lit up the dark entryway. Unknown number. My blood ran cold. A new text message. I stared at the notification, my thumb paralyzed over the screen. Who? With a sense of dread so thick it felt like I was swallowing mud, I opened it. The message was 4 words. All caps. Lock your balcony window. I read it once, twice. My brain refused to process it. It was like looking at a foreign language. Lock your balcony window. How? How could anyone know it was unlocked? I never locked it. I was on the 7th floor. Who climbed 7 floors? Then the pieces slammed together in my head with the force of a physical blow. The first click. The balcony. The clicks at the front door. A distraction. To get me to look through the peephole. To draw my attention away. My eyes shot from the phone to the dark archway leading into the living room. He wasn't trying to get in. He wasn't at the front door. He was on the balcony. He had been on the balcony a moment ago. Which meant, oh God, he was in the house. He was in the house right now. My breath hitched. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't make a sound. My phone felt like a block of ice in my hand. Every horror movie trope, every urban legend I'd ever scoffed at, flooded my mind. I was the idiot protagonist. The lone guy in his apartment, completely, utterly trapped. The front door was my only way out, and he was somewhere between me and it. Scree. It was the faintest sound, but in the crushing silence, it was as loud as a gunshot, the sound of metal on metal. The gentle, deliberate slide of my balcony door opening from the living room. My survival instincts screamed. Panic clawed at my throat, but I choked it down. I couldn't scream. Screaming would tell him where I was. I backed away from the front door, one slow step at a time, my eyes glued to the dark living room. My bedroom door was just a few feet away, slightly ajar. It was my only chance. Run for the front door? No, he was right there. He'd be on me before I could even turn the deadbolt. I slipped backward into the darkness of my bedroom. My hand, slick with sweat, fumbled for something, anything, on my desk. My fingers closed around the cold, hard plastic of a box cutter I used for opening packages. I pulled it into my palm, my thumb pushing the blade out with a soft schlick. A pathetic weapon, but it was all I had. I flattened myself against the wall behind the door, making myself as small as possible. I was in the sliver of shadow hidden from the main part of the room. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I was sure he could hear it from the living room. I held my breath, listening, trying to filter out the frantic thumping in my own ears. I held the box cutter in a white-knuckled grip, the cheap plastic digging into my skin. Silence. No footsteps, no creaking floorboards, nothing. Just a suffocating, absolute silence that stretched for what felt like an eternity. Every nerve in my body was on fire. I strained to hear a breath, a rustle of clothing, anything. Where was he? Was he just standing there in the living room? Waiting. Was this a game? My mind raced. Why send the text? Why announce himself? It was a power play. He wasn't just here to rob me. He wanted me to know he was here. He wanted me to be afraid. It was working. A full minute passed. Maybe more. The silence was worse than any noise. The uncertainty was a physical torture. I had to know. I couldn't just stand here, waiting for a hand to grab me out of the dark. Slowly, millimeter by millimeter, I leaned forward. I peered through the narrow gap between the door and the frame. My world was a vertical slice of my own apartment. I could see the edge of the couch, a corner of the rug, the dark rectangle of the TV. The living room was empty. My eyes darted around the sliver of space I could see. Nothing moved. No shadow was out of place. And the balcony door was closed. This is not possible. I held my position for another 30 seconds, my mind reeling. Did I imagine it? The sound? The text was real. My phone was still in my other hand, the screen dark now. But the sound? Could stress and exhaustion make you hallucinate something so specific? I had to be sure. I took a shaky breath, pushed the blade back into the box cutter, and stepped out from behind the door. I moved into the open, my eyes scanning every dark corner. Kitchen. Empty. Hall closet. Closed. With the box cutter still clutched in my hand, I crept into the living room. My gaze was fixed on the balcony door. It was shut. Not just shut, but the flimsy lock on the handle was turned to the locked position. The position it was always in, because I never used it. Relief and confusion fought for control. Maybe the text was a prank, a sick, elaborate hoax. Maybe the sound was just my frayed nerves. I felt a fool, standing in my own living room with a box cutter, terrified of a ghost. I walked over to the glass door, needing the final confirmation. I put my hand on the cold glass, my forehead resting against it as I stared out into the city lights. Then I looked down, and my blood turned to ice. There, on the laminate floor, directly under the slit of the closed door, was a small, dark puddle. It wasn't large, but it was stark against the light wood grain. A puddle of water, seeping out from a pair of wet shoes, it was slowly soaking into the floorboards. My head snapped up. I looked outside again. The streets below were dry. The sky was clear. It hadn't rained all week. It was not rain. My mind refused to form the words, but my eyes saw the truth. The dark, spreading stain on the light wood. The way it seeped from under the closed balcony door. A perfect little puddle. A message. I took a step back. Then another. My bare feet found the cold laminate of the hallway. A silent retreat. My entire body was a single, taut nerve. I was prey. The thought was clear, cold, and absolute. He wasn't on the balcony anymore. He was in here. The text. The sounds at the door. It was a game. A cat-and-mouse hunt in a 700-square-foot apartment. And I was the mouse. A wave of nausea rolled through me. I couldn't stay in the open. My bedroom was a dark hole to my left. The front door felt a million miles away. He was between me and it. He had to be. Standing in the living room, hidden by the shadows the city lights couldn't reach. I didn't run. I didn't scream. My instincts took over, a primal fear that bypassed conscious thought. I slid backward into the dark frame of my bedroom, my hand still clutching the pathetic box cutter. My back hit the wall next to the door. I pressed myself into the corner, trying to shrink, to become part of the shadow. My heart hammered a frantic, desperate rhythm against my ribs. Thump, 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 thump. It was so loud, too loud. He would hear it. He had to hear it. Silence. The only sound in the world was the blood roaring in my ears. I strained, listening for a floorboard to creak, a breath, the rustle of a jacket. Nothing. The silence was an active thing, a presence. It stretched and coiled in the space between my bedroom and the living room. Was he waiting? Did he know where I was? Was he enjoying this? The not knowing was torture, a blade twisting slowly in my gut. I had to look. I couldn't stand here waiting for a hand to close around my throat. Inch by agonizing inch, I leaned forward, my eye finding the gap between the door and the frame. A thin vertical slice of my living room. The arm of the couch. The black screen of the TV. The corner of the rug. Empty. He wasn't there. My eyes darted back and forth in their narrow prison. Nothing. No movement. No shape that didn't belong. The balcony door was still closed. The little lock on the handle was still turned. My brain stuttered. No, it's not possible. The text was real. The puddle was real. I wasn't crazy. I spent a lifetime in that sliver of darkness. Maybe 2 full minutes. The adrenaline began to fade, leaving a shaky, confusing exhaustion in its place. Was he gone? Did he slip back out while I was cowering? With a shuddering breath, I pushed myself off the wall. I had to be sure. I had to see. Clenching the box cutter, I stepped out of the bedroom. The apartment felt huge and exposed. Every shadow held a monster. I crept into the living room, feet silent, my eyes scanning. I reached the balcony door. The puddle was gone. I dropped to my knees. The floor was dry. Not just dry, but clean. Not a single trace of moisture, not a smudge. I ran my hand over the spot. Nothing. It was as if it had never been there. My mind screamed. I saw it. I know I saw it. Was this part of the game? Gaslighting on a psychotic level? Oh, I scrambled back from the door, my head spinning. I needed sleep. This was what a complete lack of sleep and a gallon of shitty coffee did to you. You hallucinate. You see things. The text a wrong number? A cruel prank that just happened to coincide with a moment of extreme stress? It had to be. It was the only explanation that didn't shatter my reality. I stumbled back to my bedroom, leaving the box cutter on the kitchen counter. I didn't clean up. I didn't turn off the computer. I fell onto my bed, fully clothed, and pulled the covers over my head like a child. The world outside the blanket ceased to exist. Sleep took me like a stone sinking in black water. Morning came not with a gentle light, but with the shrill, insistent beeping of my alarm. My head throbbed. My mouth tasted like an ashtray. For a blissful second, I didn't remember. Then the memory of the puddle and the text crashed back in. A sick joke. I had to believe it was a joke. I sat up, groaning. I needed to finish that fucking code. I needed to get back to normal. I swung my legs out of bed and trudged to my desk. The monitor was still on, casting a soft blue glow in the dim morning light of the room. I slumped into the chair, ready to dive back into the nightmare of PHP. And then I saw it. On my desktop, nestled between a folder of project files and the trash icon, was a new file. It wasn't there last night. I knew my desktop. I lived on my desktop. Its name was _u.mp4. My breath caught. My fingers froze over the keyboard. No way. Probably some stupid virus. Something I downloaded by accident. That had to be it. My cursor hovered over the icon. My thumb twitched, ready to drag it straight into the trash. Delete it. Forget it. Get on with your life. But I couldn't. The curiosity was a physical itch, a hook in my gut. I had to know. Click. The video player opened. A black screen. Then, a flicker of grainy, black and white video. The quality was terrible, like an old security camera from the 90s. There was no sound. A timestamp in the bottom right corner read 4:13 a.m. It took me a second to understand what I was looking at. It was a bed. A person sleeping in it, turned away from the camera. A familiar poster on the wall behind the bed. My poster. My bed. That was me. The camera angle was high, from the corner of my laptop screen. It was my own webcam. My blood turned to ice. My stomach dropped. I couldn't breathe. I was watching myself sleep. The footage was completely still. Just me, motionless in bed. 1 minute passed. 2. The timestamp ticked forward. At exactly 3 minutes, the video ended. The player closed itself. What the fuck? The words were a ragged whisper in the silent room. I shot out of my chair, stumbling backward. My eyes locked on the little black dot of the webcam on my laptop. It was watching me. It had been watching me all night. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a hallucination. This was real. Panic, pure and unthinking, took hold. I scrambled through the clutter on my desk, my hands shaking. I found a roll of black electrical tape. My fingers were clumsy, fumbling with the end. I ripped off a piece and slapped it over the webcam lens with frantic force, pressing it down hard. A solid, black square. Opaque. Blind. There. Done. A small act of defiance. The moment my finger lifted from the tape, a voice filled the room. It came from the smart speaker on my bookshelf. A cold, synthesized voice, digitally distorted. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the silence like a razor. Useless gesture. I don't need eyes to watch you sleep. I froze, every muscle in my body locking up. The voice wasn't from a recording. It was live. It was responding to me. To what I had just done. B-Z-Z-Z-T. B-Z-Z-Z-T. My phone, on the desk. It vibrated against the wood, the sound like a rattlesnake's warning. My head snapped toward it. A new message, from the same unknown number. My hand trembled so badly I could barely pick it up. My thumb smeared across the screen, unlocking it. I opened the message. It was a picture taken from the exact same angle as the webcam video. It showed my own hand, my own fingers, pressing the black piece of tape over the laptop's lens. The picture had been taken 1 second ago. My mind shattered. It wasn't just the webcam, it wasn't the phone. He was seeing everything, the whole room. How? How was that possible? There were no other cameras. I knew this room. I lived in this room. Who are you? I screamed at the walls. What do you want? The smart speaker remained silent. The phone remained dark. No more. I wasn't going to be a puppet in this sick show. I lunged across the room. I ripped the smart speaker's plug from the wall socket. The little blue light on it died. I yanked the power cord from the back of my laptop. The screen went black. The TV. The lamp. The phone charger. I tore through the room like a storm, unplugging everything. Killing the power. Killing his eyes. I stood in the center of the room, panting. A sudden heavy silence fell. No electronic hum. No buzzing. just the sound of my own ragged breathing. I had cut him off. He was blind now. In the abrupt, total quiet, I heard it. It was not a digital sound. It was not from a speaker. It was soft, human, and it was close. A quiet chuckle. My head whipped around. The sound, it had come from the other side of the room, from my closet. A deep, primal terror erupted from my lungs in a raw, wordless shout. I snatched the wooden chair from my desk. It felt solid and heavy in my hands. A weapon. I raised it over my head, all thought gone, replaced by a pure, animal need to attack. I charged the closet door and brought the chair down with all my strength. Crack! The wood of the chair slammed against the cheap, hollow core door. I swung again, and again. Wood splintered. The frame cracked. A final desperate swing, and the latch gave way. The door flew open, slamming against the wall. I stood there, heaving, chest burning, the broken chair leg held in my white-knuckled fist. I stared into the darkness of the closet. It was empty. Just my clothes, shirts and jackets hanging in a neat row. Shoes on the floor, no one was there. No one. A wave of dizziness washed over me. I was losing my mind. I was really, truly losing my mind. I let the broken chair leg fall from my numb fingers. It clattered on the floor. I leaned against the door frame, gasping for air, sweat stinging my eyes. And as my vision cleared, as my breathing started to slow, I saw it. It wasn't one thing, but all of them. Every single coat hanger in my closet had been turned around. The hooks, instead of curling back toward the wall, were all pointing outward. A silent, uniform row. A neat, orderly, impossible gesture. He had been in there, standing in the dark, just feet from my bed while I slept. Close enough to touch me, close enough to do this. And he had left the door open for me to see. I didn't scream again. The sound was trapped in my throat, a hard knot of terror. My body moved before my brain could catch up. It was a single, unbroken motion. I pivoted, ignoring the shattered chair and the gaping hole in my closet door, and launched myself out of the bedroom. My feet pounded against the laminate floor. Kitchen. Hallway. Front door. My hands, slick with a cold sweat, fumbled with the deadbolt. It wouldn't turn. Come on, come on, come on. It was stiff. I never used it. I put my whole body into it, my shoulder pressing against the door. With a loud, painful chunk, the bolt threw back. I wrenched the door open and stumbled out into the anonymous, brightly lit hallway of my apartment building. I didn't stop. I hit the button for the elevator, a frantic, repeated jab of my thumb. The door slid open instantly, as if waiting for me. I threw myself inside and hammered the button for the lobby. The door slid shut, sealing me in the small, mirrored box. I stared at my own reflection. Wild eyes, pale face. My chest heaved. My hand was still shaking. The sight of my own clothes, hanging in that neat, impossible row of reversed hooks, played on a loop behind my eyes. He was in there. He was in the closet. The thought wasn't a thought. It was a physical sensation, a spike of ice in my heart. He was there while I slept, feet away. He watched my back rise and fall with each breath. He heard me thrashing with nightmares. And then, while I was destroying my own room in a blind panic, he had simply, what? Slipped out? Dissolved into thin air? The elevator chimed. Lobby. I burst out into the sterile, empty space and pushed through the heavy glass doors into the pre-dawn chill of the city. The air was cold on my skin, a shock that did nothing to quell the fire in my nerves. I needed to call someone. I needed another human voice. My fingers were trembling so hard I almost dropped the phone. I swiped through my contacts, my thumbs smearing the screen. There was only one name. Alex. It rang twice. Mike? What the hell? It's 6 a.m. His voice was thick with sleep, annoyed. Alex. He was in my apartment. He was in my closet. The words came out in a ragged, breathless rush. A long pause. I could hear him shifting, the rustle of sheets. Whoa, slow down, man. What are you talking about? Are you drunk? No, I'm not drunk. The texts, the video, he was in here. I'm on the street right now. I just ran out of my own goddamn apartment. Okay, calm down, he said, his tone shifting from annoyance to a cautious concern. The kind you use on a crazy person. Mike, you've been working like a dog for 3 weeks straight. You told me you were living on coffee and takeout. You're probably just stressed. Maybe you had a really vivid nightmare. It wasn't a nightmare, Alex. I smashed my closet door in. The hangers? He turned all the hangers around. The moment I said it out loud, I heard how insane it sounded. The sheer childish absurdity of it. He turned the hangers around, Alex repeated slowly. Not as a question, but as a statement of fact. A diagnosis. Okay, listen to me. You're burned out. Your mind is playing tricks on you. Why don't you get some air? Go get a coffee or something. A real one, not that sludge you brew. I'll shower and get dressed. I can be at your place in an hour, okay? We'll check it out together. You don't believe me. It wasn't an accusation. It was a flat, dead realization. I believe you're terrified, dude, and I'm on my way. Just get out of your head for a bit. Go to that coffee shop on Brant, the one you like. I'll meet you there. The line clicked dead. I stood on the empty sidewalk, the phone limp in my hand. He thought I was crazy. Maybe I was, but the memory of the synthesized voice, the photo of my own hand, the silent chuckle from the closet, it felt more real than the concrete under my feet. Still, what choice did I have? I couldn't go back in there. Not alone. I shoved my phone in my pocket and started walking toward Brant Street. The coffee shop was an oasis of normal, the hiss of the espresso machine, the low murmur of a few early risers, the smell of roasted beans and warm pastry. I ordered a black coffee, my voice a croak. I found a small table in the back and sank into a chair, my body aching with a exhaustion that went deeper than muscle. I stared into my cup, the black liquid a dark mirror. I just had to wait for Alex. He would come. He would see the broken door. He would have to believe me then. Maybe. My hands were still shaking. I wrapped them around the warm ceramic mug, a small island of heat in a world that had turned freezing cold. 15 minutes crawled by. My phone buzzed on the table. Alex? I snatched it up, a wave of relief washing over me. Hey, are you close? I asked. A beat of silence. Then Alex's voice, but it was different, flat, devoid of the sleepy warmth from before. Mike? Where are you? I'm at your building? I've been buzzing you for 5 minutes. A knot of confusion tightened in my stomach. What? I'm at the coffee shop. On Brant? You told me to come here. Another pause, longer this time. It stretched out, filled with an electric hum. I never said that, Mike. Why would I tell you to go to a coffee shop when I said I was coming to your place? The world tilted. The background chatter of the cafe faded into a dull roar. What are you talking about? You just called me 15 minutes ago. You told me to get some air and wait for you here. I was almost shouting now, my voice cracking. A woman at a nearby table glanced over at me with mild alarm. Mike, I did not call you. His voice was now laced with a new tone, a careful, professional sort of worry, the kind a doctor uses. I literally just woke up 5 minutes ago because my alarm went off. I saw like a dozen missed calls and texts from you about someone being in your apartment, so I called you right away. Are you okay? Seriously, where are you? My blood turned to ice. My hand started to shake so violently that coffee sloshed over the rim of the mug, a hot splash on my fingers. I barely felt it. No, I whispered. No, no, no. I pulled the phone away from my ear, my thumb fumbling to navigate the screen. To the call log. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. I scrolled down. Alex. The last call was from yesterday afternoon, 2:17 p.m. There was no record of a call 15 minutes ago. No record of a call at 6 in the morning. Nothing. It didn't exist. It had never happened. My phone vibrated in my hand, a violent, angry buzz that made me yelp. A new text message. From the unknown number. I stared at the notification banner, the words burning themselves onto my retina. Your friend can't help you. I dropped the phone on the table as if it were red hot. It clattered against the ceramic mug. He can mimic voices. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. That wasn't Alex on the phone, not the first time. It was him. It was the thing from my apartment. It had listened to my panic, soothed me with my friend's voice, and then sent me out here, sent me away from the one person who might have helped. It was a game. All of it was a game, and he was setting the rules, moving the pieces, and I wasn't even aware I was playing. I was trapped, not in my apartment, but out here, in the open, exposed. My head snapped up, my eyes darted around the coffee shop. A woman in a business suit typed furiously on a laptop. A student with headphones nodded his head to a silent beat. 2 construction workers laughed over their breakfast sandwiches. They were all normal. They were all just people. But were they? Which one was it? The woman? The student? Anyone could have a phone. Anyone could be typing those messages. The friendly cafe had transformed into a cage full of potential monsters. My gaze swept the room, growing wider, more frantic. It landed on a man in the far corner, half hidden in the morning shadows. He wore a simple, dark hoodie, the hood pulled up. He was just sitting there, not drinking, not reading, just watching. He was watching me. As our eyes met, the corners of his mouth pulled back into a slow, deliberate smile. It was not a friendly smile, it was a smile of ownership. A smile that said, I see you, I know you, I've been in your closet. A surge of pure, primal adrenaline shot through me. All fear, all confusion was burned away and replaced with a hot, white rage. Fight or flight. My body chose fight. I launched myself out of my chair. It screeched against the floor and toppled over. My glass of water went with it, shattering on the tiles with a loud crash that silenced the entire cafe. Every eye turned to me. You! I screamed, pointing a shaking finger at the man in the corner. Who the fuck are you? I took a step toward him, then another. My vision tunneled. It was just me and him. I blinked. A single involuntary muscle spasm from the stress, and he was gone. The chair in the corner was empty. Not just empty, but neatly tucked under the table, as if no one had been sitting there at all. There was no indentation on the cushion, no lingering warmth. It was just an empty table. I stood there, panting, my arms still outstretched, pointing at nothing. The barista was already walking toward me with a broom and dustpan. Sir! Are you all right? He asked, his voice low and cautious. The man, I stammered, my voice breaking. The guy who was just sitting there, in the hoodie. Where did he go? The barista stopped, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. He looked at the empty table, then back at me. Sir, I've been behind the counter all morning. No one has been sitting in that corner. That table's been empty since we opened. The words didn't compute. My brain refused to accept them. I saw him. I saw him smile. I wasn't losing my mind. I wasn't. I stumbled past the concerned barista, my legs feeling like they were moving through water. I had to see for myself. I walked to the empty table, my heart pounding a sick, slow rhythm. Empty. The wood grain of the tabletop was clean. The chair was pushed in. It was exactly as the barista said. But it wasn't completely empty. There, in the exact center of the small, round table, lay a single object. It glinted under the low lights of the cafe. A key. It was brass, slightly worn. It had 3 sharp teeth and 1 rounded one. A small, faded red plastic ring was looped through the top. It was a perfect copy of my apartment key. My mind was a blank circuit, overloaded and fried. The barista's words echoed in the hollow space where my thoughts used to be. No one has been sitting in that corner. But I saw him. The hoodie. The smile. And the key. The key was in my hand, heavy and cold. Real. I'd stumbled out of the coffee shop, leaving the shattered glass and concerned faces behind. I didn't know where I was going, only that my feet were moving, carrying me through the gray morning streets, back toward the one place I never wanted to see again. There was no other choice. This had to end. I had to know if I was losing my mind. Tomorrow I'd call a doctor, a psychiatrist, whatever it took. For tonight I just had to get inside, lock the door, and pretend the world wasn't tilting off its axis. I stood before my apartment door. Number 4B. The wood looked solid, impassive. It knew nothing. I felt a surge of useless anger and kicked it. Not hard, just a dull thud of frustration. My gaze fell. There, near the bottom, was a long, fresh scratch in the paint. Deep, down to the pale wood beneath. My breath hitched. I hadn't seen that before. Wait. Calm down. My own voice of reason sounded thin and desperate. You probably did that this morning. When you ran. When you were panicking. I nodded to myself, clinging to the explanation. It had to be that. I did it. I was the source of the chaos. It was the only answer that didn't break me. My hand trembled as I lifted the new key, the one from the cafe table. The brass felt old, alien. It slid into the lock. A perfect fit. With a smooth, well-oiled click, the deadbolt retracted. The sound was wrong. My lock was always stiff. This one was silent, easy. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The apartment was just as I'd left it, a war zone of my own making. The broken pieces of the chair lay on the floor. The hole in my closet door gaped like a mouth. The sight was almost comforting. It was proof of my panic, my breakdown. It was explainable. But then I looked at the bookshelf against the far wall. Something was off. I squinted. It took me a second to understand. Every single book had been turned around. 100 white and yellowed pages faced out. 100 colorful spines were pressed against the wall. It wasn't messy. It was meticulous. A library for someone who couldn't read. What the... I whispered. It wasn't a robbery. A thief wouldn't waste time doing this. My eyes darted around the room. The single wooden chair I used for my small dining table was overturned, lying on its side. But it wasn't flung there. It was placed, centered perfectly, in the small space between the couch and the wall, like a piece of strange, minimalist art. This wasn't chaos. This was a message. This was a statement. My heart began to pick up its pace. A low, nervous drumbeat. I took a step toward the kitchen, my shoes crunching softly on some debris I couldn't see. I needed a drink. I needed something to dull the sharp edges of this new reality. The linoleum floor of the kitchen gleamed under the overhead light. It was clean. Too clean. And then I saw it. In the dead center of the floor, every knife, every fork, every spoon from my cutlery drawer was laid out in a perfect interlocking circle. The steak knives pointed outward like sun rays. The forks were arranged in an inner ring, their tines pointing up at the ceiling. The spoons formed the core, their silver bowls reflecting the light in 100 tiny, distorted images of my own terrified face. It was a mandala of metal and madness. It was the most insane, deliberate thing I had ever seen. I stood frozen in the doorway, staring at it. My brain simply refused to process the image. It was impossible. It was a violation. WHAM. The sound was a physical blow. It was so loud, so violent, it felt like the building's foundation had cracked. It was the sound of every door in my apartment. The front door, the bedroom door, the bathroom door, every closet door, slamming shut at the exact same instant. The finality of it was absolute. My ears rang. The air pressure in the kitchen changed, popping my eardrums. I lunged for the kitchen doorway I had just been standing in. My hand closed around the knob. It wouldn't turn. I rattled it, a frantic, useless jiggling. It was solid, locked, trapped. I was locked in the kitchen. And then the scratching started. It came from the other side of the kitchen door. A dry, scraping sound. At first, I thought it was a rat. But it was too loud, too rhythmic. It was the sound of fingernails. Dozens of them. Not the slow drag of a single finger, but a frantic, desperate clawing, covering the entire surface of the door at once. The sound of wood splintering under the assault. SHK, 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 a sound that went straight to the base of my spine and turned my blood to ice water. It was a living sound, an animal sound, a sound that wanted in. Who's there? My voice was a useless squeak. The scratching intensified, faster now, a furious storm of noise that filled the small kitchen. I backed away, my hands clamped over my ears, but I could still feel the vibration of it through the soles of my shoes. I looked around wildly. My phone. Where was my fucking phone? On the little table by the door. in the living room. On the other side of this. No windows, no other way out. The scratching was the only thing in the world. It was eating the door alive. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The silence that followed was worse. It was heavy, thick with anticipation. I held my breath, listening. My heart hammered against my ribs. A tiny creak from the doorknob. It started to turn. Slowly at first, then faster, a frantic, impossible rattling back and forth. The metal shrieked in protest. This wasn't a person trying a lock. This was something trying to rip the mechanism itself apart from the other side. Bang! A heavy impact slammed against the wood. The whole door bulged inward, the frame groaning. I screamed, a raw, animal noise torn from my throat. Bang! Another impact. A crack appeared in the center panel of the door. I didn't think. I reacted. Fight or flight. There was nowhere to fly. I surged forward and threw my entire body weight against the door, my shoulder pressed into the wood, my feet scrambling for purchase on the linoleum. "Get the fuck out of my house!" I roared. For a moment I held it, me against it. The door shuddered under my shoulder. I could feel the pressure on the other side, a solid, hateful weight. Then a force beyond anything human slammed into the door. It wasn't a punch or a kick. It was a dead-weight ramming force that lifted me off my feet. I was thrown backward, stumbling over my own legs, my head cracking against a cabinet as I fell. The kitchen door flew open with an explosive crack, ripping off one of its hinges and slamming into the wall. It hung there, broken and askew. I lay on the floor, dazed, my vision swimming. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard the silence. The hallway was empty. The apartment was still. There was no one there. There was nothing. Slowly, painfully, I pushed myself up. My head throbbed. My breath came in ragged, burning gasps. My eyes locked on the destroyed door. It wasn't just splintered from the impacts. The entire surface, from top to bottom, was covered in a dense web of scratches. Hundreds, maybe thousands of them. They were small, shallow, overlapping gouges, as if made by the frenzied, desperate fingernails of a trapped child. And from the deepest of these tiny wounds, a thick, black fluid was beginning to ooze, crawling in slow, greasy drips down the violated wood. The black fluid pulsed, a thick, tar-like tear weeping from the wood. I lay on the linoleum, the world a blurry, ringing mess. My head hit the cabinet. Hard. A hot, wet stickiness was already seeping into my hair. But my eyes were locked on the door. The broken, savaged door. The thousands of tiny scratches. The weeping goo. This was not a person. People don't do this. People can't do this. My own survival instinct, buried under layers of shock, finally kicked in. A single screaming thought cut through the fog. Cops! I needed the cops. Scrambling on hands and knees, my head screaming with every motion, I crawled out of the kitchen. The living room was just as I had left it, an arena of meticulous insanity. The books turned backward, the chair placed just so, and my phone. My beautiful, life-saving phone, sitting on the small table by the front door. I grabbed it. My fingers felt clumsy, fat. I stabbed at the screen, dialing 911. The voice on the other end was calm, procedural. It made my own ragged breathing sound even more insane. "There's someone in my house," I gasped, the words tumbling out. They broke down my kitchen door, I think. I don't know what they are. "Are you in a safe location, sir?" "No, I don't know. I think they're gone, but..." I looked back at the kitchen, at the black fluid. They left something. The wait was the longest of my life. I huddled by the main door, the deadbolt my only friend, peering through the peephole every 10 seconds. Finally, the flashing lights painted my dark street in strokes of red and blue. 2 of them came up. One old, tired, with a gut that strained his uniform shirt. The other young, alert, eyes darting everywhere. They looked at the splintered scratch on the front door. They looked at me, at the blood matting my hair. "You the caller?" the older one asked. His voice was flat. I nodded, letting them in. They stepped inside, their boots loud on the hardwood. Their eyes swept the room. They saw the broken chair pieces from my morning panic. They saw the overturned chair. The younger one poked a book on the shelf, turning it over. He looked at his partner and gave a slight, almost invisible shrug. "You said your kitchen door was broken down," the older one said, walking past me. I followed them. They stood in the doorway, staring at the destroyed door hanging from a single hinge. They saw the web of scratches. They saw the black ooze, which had now dripped onto the floor in a small, greasy puddle. The young cop knelt, careful not to touch it. He sniffed. "Smells like old oil. Or grease." "Your assailant," the older one began, turning to me, his face a mask of professional boredom. "Did you see them?" "No, I heard them. It threw me against a cabinet." I pointed at my head. He glanced at the wound. "You need to get that looked at. We can call an ambulance." "I'm fine. What about this? What about—" I gestured wildly at the room. "All this?" He sighed, pulling out a notepad. "Anything taken? Wallet? TV? Laptop?" "No, nothing's taken. That's not the point." "Look at this place. A thief doesn't do this." My voice was rising, cracking. The two cops exchanged another look. I knew that look. It was the look people give you when they think you're on something, or off your meds, or in the middle of a really bad breakdown. "So, no forced entry on the main door," the old cop summarized, clicking his pen. "Nothing stolen. Vandalism inside. You have any enemies, Mr. Kale? A recent breakup? Trouble at work?" "No, this isn't a breakup," I yelled, then immediately regretted it. My shouting only made me sound more unstable. They took my statement. They took pictures of the door. They wrote things down. But their questions were all wrong. They were looking for a person. A motive. They didn't see what I saw. This wasn't hatred. It was art. It was a message written in a language of madness. They left me a card with a case number on it and a recommendation to get a new lock and maybe see a doctor for my head. As the front door closed behind them, the click of the lock sounded like a gavel falling. "Case dismissed. You're on your own, kid." I slid down the wall, my back against the door, and just breathed. The apartment felt huge and silent now, empty. The police had been here. They had walked through it. Their presence should have cleansed the space, made it normal again. It hadn't. It felt like they had just walked through a ghost, and the ghost was still here, watching me. I couldn't just sit here. I had to do something. Anything. Cleaning. That was something normal people did. I pushed myself up and went back to the kitchen. The first thing was the cutlery. The insane metal mandala on the floor. I knelt, my knees cracking. I started picking them up one by one. Fork. Spoon. Knife. The cold metal felt real in my hand. Clink. I dropped it into the sink. Fork. Spoon. Knife. Clink. My movements were robotic. A way to reclaim the space. To undo what it had done. Spoon. Knife. I reached for the last one, a heavy steak knife lying point out. As my fingers closed around the handle, I felt something underneath it. Something hard and rectangular. Not a fork. Not a spoon. Slowly, I lifted the knife. There, on the clean linoleum, lay a phone. An old one. A Nokia brick from a decade ago. The dark blue plastic was scuffed and worn. The screen was a spider web of cracks. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't mine. I had my phone. This was left here. Dropped. It was evidence. Real physical proof. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't having a breakdown. Someone tangible was here, and they had dropped their phone. A surge of something hot and sharp, something that felt like hope, shot through me. I snatched it up. The plastic was cold. It felt heavy, solid, It was real. I turned it over and over in my hands. The back panel was loose. I pressed the power button on the top, a small rubber nub. I held it down, my thumb trembling. Nothing. Of course. Dead for years, probably. My hopes soured. Just another piece of trash in this madhouse. I almost threw it into the sink with the rest of the cutlery. But my thumb pressed the button again. A desperate final push. A low, familiar beep echoed in the quiet kitchen. The cracked screen flickered to life. A pair of pixelated white hands reaching for each other against the blue background. My heart hammered against my ribs. It still worked. It had battery. My fingers, slick with sweat, navigated the simple menu. There was no call history. No contacts. No messages. The phone was wiped clean. Except for one thing. The gallery icon showed a 1 next to it. One file. My thumb hovered over the select button. A deep, primal part of my brain screamed at me not to look. To take the phone, smash it with a hammer, and throw the pieces in the river. This was a Pandora's box. But I had to know. I had to see the face of the monster. I pressed the button. The file was a video. It opened immediately. The quality was poor, grainy, the colors washed out, but the location was unmistakable. It was my living room. It was filmed from the exact corner where the bookshelf now stood. The camera was low to the ground. The room was different, yet the same. There was a different couch, a floral one. The walls were a pale yellow. But the window was the same. The layout of the room was the same. In the middle of the floor, a woman with long brown hair was laughing, playing with a little girl, maybe 4 or 5 years old. The girl wore a bright red dress and squealed with delight as the woman tickled her. The sound coming from the tiny speaker was tinny but filled with joy. It was a home movie. A moment of pure, sunlit happiness in my apartment. I watched, mesmerized. Who were these people? Former tenants? The girl looked up, her face a blurry cherub's O, and pointed toward the camera. "Daddy's filming!" she chirped. The woman looked over, smiling, and waved. And then it happened. Click! The apartment in the video plunged into absolute darkness. The sunlight from the window vanished, as if a switch had been flicked on the sun itself. The video was now just a black screen, but the audio continued. The woman's laughter cut off into a sharp, terrified gasp. "David? Is that you? That's not funny." A pause. Then a scream. Not a movie scream. It was a real scream. A raw, throat-tearing sound of pure animal terror that seemed to go on forever. Underneath it, the little girl started crying. A high, piercing wail of confusion and fear. The audio was a wall of panic. Then a wet, ugly thud. The woman's scream stopped. The girl's crying intensified, closer to the microphone now, panicked and desperate. "Mommy? Mommy, wake up." The video ended. The screen went back to the menu. I stood frozen, the phone clutched in my hand. The tinny sound of the child's cry still echoed in my ears. I knew that cry. I had heard it just this morning, through the wall. This wasn't a warning. This wasn't a threat. This was a recording of what happened here. In my home. Click! My own lights went out. The entire apartment was plunged into the same sudden, complete darkness as the video. Not a flicker. Not a slow fade. Just gone. The hum of the refrigerator died. The glow from the streetlights outside my window vanished. It was a thick, ink-black silence. My blood ran cold. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My ears strained, listening for something, anything. Then I heard it, from the far corner of the living room, where the bookshelf was, where the video had been filmed from. A whimper. A soft, sad little sob. It was the same cry, the exact same child's cry from the video. It wasn't coming from the phone in my hand. It was in the room with me. I backed away, stumbling into the kitchen counter. My hand scrabbled for the knife block, my fingers closing around the handle of the chef's knife. The weeping continued, soft and steady. a sound of profound, endless grief. Then, a soft shuffle, the sound of small, bare feet on a wood floor. It was moving. It was coming toward the kitchen. My mind raced. Run! Hide! Fight! The front door was on the other side of the living room, on the other side of the sound. The knife in my hand felt pathetic, useless. My body was shaking so hard the knife rattled against the countertop. The shuffling stopped at the kitchen doorway. I held my breath, listening to the frantic drumming in my own ears. Silence. A long, drawn-out silence that stretched for an eternity. Then the weeping started again. Closer now. So close. It was right there. Right on the other side of the door frame, just out of sight. I shrank back, pressing myself into the corner between the fridge and the cabinets, making myself as small as I could. I squeezed my eyes shut. If I can't see it, it can't see me. A child's logic, my own logic, was gone. The crying stopped. Instantly. The sudden silence was a physical blow. I waited, every muscle in my body coiled tight as a spring. Something cold and small touched my shoulder. It was a hand. A tiny hand, fingers barely wrapping around the curve of my shoulder blade. It didn't grab. It just rested there. A feather-like touch 1,000,000 times heavier than a punch. I froze. A scream caught in my throat. I could feel the individual points of cold from each small finger through my shirt. Then, a voice whispered directly beside my ear. It wasn't a distorted machine voice. It was clear. The voice of a little girl, innocent and confused. "You're not my daddy." A pause. The small hand tightened its grip just a little. "Where's my daddy?" The cold spread from my shoulder, a deep cellular chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. It was the cold of the grave. I squeezed my eyes shut, a useless defense. The plastic grip of the chef's knife dug into my palm. My knuckles were white. The tiny hand was still there. Immense pressure and a feather-light touch. "Where's my daddy?" the whisper repeated. A clean, sharp icicle of sound right next to my ear. My throat was locked. My lungs burned. A scream was trapped in my chest. A wild animal clawing at the bars of my ribs. Fight! Run! Do something! But my body was a statue of ice. I couldn't move. I couldn't even fall. Then, it was gone. The hand vanished. The cold spot on my shoulder faded. The presence beside me dissolved into the black air. I was alone again. I didn't move for a long time. Maybe it was a minute. Maybe it was an hour. Time had collapsed. The only thing that existed was the pounding of blood in my ears, and the image of that small, cold hand burned onto my mind. I stayed crouched in that corner, clutching the knife, until the blackness outside my window began to soften into the dim gray light of dawn. The darkness didn't recede. It just changed color. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every creak of the building, every distant siren, every rustle of leaves outside was her. Coming back. The sun came up. It did nothing to warm the apartment. The light felt weak, intrusive. It just illuminated the mess, the overturned chair, the savaged kitchen door, the mandala of cutlery in the sink. The old Nokia phone lay on the counter, a dark blue brick of poison. I had to know. I wasn't going crazy. The police report, the dismissive looks, my own self-doubt. That was all noise. The video was real. The voice was real. The hand was real. Lily was her name. A ghost named Lily. She wasn't a random specter. She was tied to this place. To find out why, I had to find out what happened to her. My laptop. My lifeline to a world that still made sense. I sat at the kitchen table, the chef's knife lying next to my keyboard, a pathetic talisman. My fingers trembled as I typed. I started broad. Child missing 8th Street apartment. Nothing. Too generic. Millions of hits about Amber Alerts and runaways. I narrowed it. I used the building's old name, the Crestview, before it was rebranded. The Crestview Apartments crime. The Crestview homicide. Page after page of tenant reviews, rental listings, ads for plumbers. Nothing. Frustration began to bubble up, hot and acidic. I was losing my mind, chasing a ghost story I'd invented in my own head. Maybe the cops were right. Maybe I had cracked. No, I whispered to the empty room. The Nokia phone seemed to stare at me from the counter. It was real. I tried a new combination, my last desperate attempt. David Lily Crestview apartment. I hit enter. There was one result. Just one. Tucked away on the fourth page of the search, a link to a digitized news archive from a local paper that had gone out of business years ago. The headline was stark. Local man in suspected murder-suicide. Daughter remains missing. My blood ran cold. I clicked. The page loaded slowly. The text fuzzy. The date was 5 years ago. 5 years. The name jumped out at me. David Crow, 34. His wife, Sarah Crow, 32. The police believed David Crow had killed his wife in their fourth-floor apartment at the Crestview before taking his own life in prison awaiting trial. But it was the next line that made me stop breathing. Their 6-year-old daughter, Lily Crow, was reported missing the same night. An extensive search was conducted. She was never found. Police presumed her a victim of the father, her body hidden before he was apprehended. The case was officially closed. I scrolled down, and there it was. A school photo. A little girl with dark brown hair and 2 pigtails. A small gap between her front teeth. She wore a bright red dress. The same red dress from the video. The same face that had looked up and chirped, "Daddy's filming!" Lily. This was her. This was her home. The pieces slammed together in my head with the force of a physical impact. The child's cry I'd heard through the wall. The home movie on the discarded phone. The whisper in my ear. It wasn't an intruder. It wasn't a stalker trying to scare me. It was her. The ghost of Lily Crow. She wasn't haunting me. She was stuck here, reliving the worst night of her life over and over, reaching out to the only person who could see her. The scratches on the doors, the things moved around. It wasn't an attack. It was a child's desperate, clumsy attempt to get my attention. She wasn't trying to hurt me. She was trying to talk. And I hadn't been listening. As that thought solidified, the TV in the living room flicked on. Not with a burst of static. It blinked to life on a single channel. An old news report. The video quality was terrible, the colors washed out. A weary-looking reporter stood on the sidewalk, a microphone in her hand. Behind her, uncannily familiar, was the front entrance to my building. Yellow police tape was stretched across the doors. "The community is in shock tonight," the reporter said, her voice tinny and distant through the TV speakers, following the horrific events that unfolded here at the Crestview Apartments. Police are still searching for any sign of 6-year-old Lily Crow, who vanished from her home. The report played for about 30 seconds. Then the footage stuttered and looped, starting again from the beginning. "The community is in shock tonight." I stumbled into the living room, my eyes locked on the screen. I snatched the remote from the coffee table, my thumb mashing the power button. Nothing. The reporter kept talking. I lunged for the wall and yanked the TV's power cord from the socket. The screen stayed on. The voice didn't stop. Following the horrific events that unfolded here, a cold dread seeped into my bones. This wasn't a glitch. This was a message. This was control. She was showing me, making sure I understood. My apartment was a tomb, and she was the curator of its exhibit. I backed away from the TV, my heart hammering. My eyes darted around the room, which no longer felt like mine. It was a stage. Her stage. I had to do something. The old way, the call the cops way, was useless. They were looking for a person. This was something else. This needed a different approach. My gaze fell on the old Nokia phone, still sitting on the kitchen counter. Evidence. A connection. I walked back into the kitchen, my steps feeling heavy, as if I were wading through water. I picked up the phone. The plastic was cold and smooth. Holding it, I turned back toward the living room, toward the endlessly looping news report. I took a deep breath, the air thin and icy. I spoke to the empty space. My voice came out as a ragged crack. "Lily?" The news report cut off. The TV screen went black. Silence crashed down on the apartment, so sudden and complete it felt like a physical blow. "Is that you?" My voice was trembling, but I forced the words out. I saw the video. I know what happened. I'm sorry. What can I do to help?" For a second, there was nothing. A perfect, still silence. I held my breath. Then came the cold. It wasn't a gradual drop. It was instantaneous. Like a walk-in freezer door had been thrown open, the air solidified. I saw my own breath plume in front of my face, a white cloud in the sunlit room. A low groan started, the sound of wood warping under pressure. Then all hell broke loose. The kitchen drawers were ripped from their housings, one by one, flying across the room and shattering against the far wall. Silverware rained down like shrapnel. The cabinet doors were torn from their hinges, plates and glasses inside, launching themselves into the air and exploding into 1,000 pieces. It wasn't chaos. It was rage. A pure, unrestrained, 6-year-old tantrum given the power of a hurricane. I threw my arms over my head, ducking down as a cookbook sailed past my ear and embedded itself in the drywall. The sound was deafening. The shriek of tortured metal, the crack of splitting wood, the symphony of smashing porcelain. The entire apartment shook with the force of her fury. My question hadn't brought peace. It had uncorked something terrible, a deep, bottomless well of anger and pain. It was a storm, and I was at its center. I squeezed my eyes shut, waiting for the impact, for a flying shard of glass or a piece of wood to end it, and then, as quickly as it began, it stopped. The silence that followed was a ringing, aching void. I lowered my arms, my body shaking uncontrollably. The apartment was destroyed. It looked like a bomb had gone off. Shards of glass and ceramic littered the floor like snow. Every drawer, every cabinet was empty and broken. But in the center of the wreckage, something lay on the floor. It hadn't been thrown. It had been placed. A photo album. A thick, leather-bound book that must have been in one of the drawers. It had fallen right at my feet. It was open to the very last page. I knelt slowly, my knees crunching on broken glass. I looked down at the page. It was a single, large photograph. A family portrait. A smiling woman, Sarah. A little girl in a red dress held in her mother's arms, Lily. And standing behind them, his hands on his wife's shoulders, a man with dark hair and a plain face. David Crow. The father. The killer. Except his face wasn't there. It had been violently, completely obliterated. Not with a pen. It looked like it had been done with a shard of glass or fingernails. Deep, gouged lines tore through the photograph, shredding the paper image of his eyes, his nose, his mouth, until nothing remained but a black nest of frenzied, overlapping scratches, a void where a face should have been. I stared at the shredded picture, at the violent, empty space next to the smiling faces of his wife and daughter. The whisper from the night before echoed in my mind, but now it had a new meaning. "Where's my daddy?" It wasn't a question, it was an accusation. And the ghost of a little girl, lost in my apartment, had just told me who to blame. The ringing in my ears was the only sound left. A high, thin whine that cut through the silence. I stood in the middle of the wreckage of my kitchen, my feet crunching on a carpet of broken glass and ceramic. The air was thick with the dust of drywall and shattered wood. It wasn't my apartment anymore. It was a wound. An open, gaping wound. My heart hammered against my ribs. A frantic drumbeat in the sudden quiet. I looked at the photo album on the floor. At the violently erased face of David Crow. "Where's my daddy?" It wasn't a question. It was an indictment. A verdict. My mind raced. This changed everything. She wasn't an angry, random spirit. She was a witness. The only witness. The chaos. The tantrum. It wasn't aimed at me. It was grief. It was rage at him. At the man in the photo. A new thought, sharp and clear, cut through my fear. Maybe I could help. Maybe that's what this was all about. I took a staggered breath. The air still felt cold. "Lily?" I said. My voice was a weak croak. It sounded stupid in the destroyed room. Talking to the air. Fucking great. Silence. I waited. Nothing. Not a flicker of the lights, not a whisper. Not a single object moved. It was like the energy that had torn the room apart had just vanished, leaving only the mess behind. An overwhelming sense of absurdity washed over me. Here I was, standing in a demolition site, trying to have a conversation with a ghost. All I got was dead air. I get it. I tried again, my voice a little stronger. I understand. I saw the picture. He's the one you're angry at. David Crow. But what do you want me to do? Tell me. Still nothing. The silence was heavier this time. It felt dismissive. I was a crazy person talking to myself. The fear began to curdle back into a sour knot of frustration and helplessness. This was impossible. How do you negotiate with a memory? How do you reason with pain? How was a sour knot, a sour knot, a sour knot, a sour knot, a sour knot. I needed to try something else. I wasn't getting through. My words were useless. Maybe she needed to see it. Maybe she needed to know that I knew. My laptop. It was still on the kitchen table, miraculously untouched by the violent outburst. The chef's knife lay next to it. I pushed aside a shard of a coffee mug and picked up the laptop, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I walked back into the living room, navigating the debris field. The TV was still dark and silent, its power cord still hanging limp from the wall socket. I sat on the edge of the couch, placing the laptop on the coffee table. My fingers fumbled on the trackpad. I already had the news article open. I scrolled down to the photo. David Crow. A grainy, black and white picture from what looked like a driver's license. Blank eyes. A thin, unremarkable face. The face of a monster who had killed his wife and, everyone believed, his daughter. I took a deep breath. This felt insane, but it was the only idea I had. I turned the laptop screen toward the empty room, toward the spot where she had whispered in my ear. "Is this him?" I asked, my voice low. "Lily, is this your daddy? Is this the man you're looking for?" For a second, the same profound silence answered me. I started to think this was another dead end, another stupid attempt. A sound erupted from the laptop speakers. It wasn't a word, it was a shriek, a high-pitched, digital scream of pure, corrupt data that clawed at my eardrums. It was the sound of a dial-up modem being fed through a guitar distortion pedal. I recoiled, clapping my hands over my ears, my teeth vibrating in my skull. The sound was a physical thing, a needle of ice driving into my brain. On the screen, the image of David Crow began to warp, the pixels twisted, and then words began to form over his face, not typed. They looked like they were being finger-painted onto the screen from the inside, in a deep, wet red that dripped down the virtual glass. Notdaddy. The scream cut out. The words remained, glowing and obscene on the screen. Not Daddy. My blood went cold. I stared at the message, the letters seeming to pulse with a faint, dark light. My entire theory, the one thing that made any sense of this nightmare, just shattered into a million pieces. If David Crow wasn't her father, then who was? And why was his face the one she'd ripped to shreds in the photo album? Why lead me to an article about him at all? It didn't make sense. None of this made any sense. My mind was a tangled knot of confusion and terror. What the hell was going on in this apartment? Moon. A new sound. Behind me. A soft, scraping noise. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat. The heavy armchair in the corner of the living room was moving. It wasn't being thrown. It was sliding across the floor, slow and deliberate, leaving 2 clean tracks in the film of dust. It moved about 5 feet, then stopped, oriented at a strange angle. Then, from the kitchen, a chunk of the broken cabinet door lifted into the air, hovered for a second, and then set itself down on the floor. A moment later, the overturned leg of the kitchen table did the same. My breath hitched. This wasn't rage anymore. This was something else. This was purposeful. She was pointing. One by one, pieces of wreckage were being repositioned. The mangled TV stand, a floor lamp, a stack of books that had survived the storm. They were being arranged, moved, placed with an eerie precision. It was no longer a random disaster zone. It was a path, a crudely marked trail made of my broken belongings, leading from where I stood, through the living room, and straight toward the closed door of my bedroom. A path to what? My feet felt like lead, but I was being pulled along by a current I couldn't fight. I followed the trail of debris. My eyes were fixed on the bedroom door at the end of the line. The final piece of the path was the photo album, which had somehow moved from the kitchen and now lay on the floor right in front of the door, still open to the page with the desecrated photograph. A final clue. I reached the bedroom and pushed the door open. The room was untouched, clean. It was the only part of the apartment that hadn't been savaged. The bed was made. My clothes were folded on a chair. It was a pocket of normalcy in a world gone mad. The path of wreckage didn't stop at the door. Inside the room, a single, clear line had been drawn in the dust on the hardwood floor. A finger-width line, leading from the doorway directly to the center of the far wall. The wall was blank. Empty. Just a smooth, painted surface. No pictures, no furniture against it. Nothing. What was I supposed to see? I walked to the wall, my mind a blank slate of fear. I reached out a trembling hand and touched the paint. It was cool and solid. Just a wall. This was a dead end. A ghost's nonsensical game. But the line on the floor ended here. The trail of broken furniture led here. Every sign pointed right here. I knocked on it. My knuckles made a dull thud. Solid. I moved a foot to the right. Knocked again. Thud. I moved to the left. Thud. Frustration pricked at me. Then I tried a spot lower, about waist high, right where the dusty line ended. I knocked. Thump. The sound was different. Not a thud. A thump. Deeper. Resonant. It was hollow. My breath caught. It was hollow. There was a space behind it. I needed to see what was inside. The thought wasn't mine. It felt planted there, an urgent command. My tool chest was in the closet. I stumbled over to it, my hands clumsy as I fumbled with the latches. I pulled out a claw hammer. It felt heavy and real in my hand. A solid piece of a world that still followed the laws of physics. I went back to the hollow spot on the wall. I didn't hesitate. I didn't think. I just swung. The hammer hit the wall with a loud crack. A spider web of fractures appeared in the paint. Plaster dust puffed into the air. I swung again, harder this time. A chunk of drywall broke loose and fell to the floor, revealing the dark space behind it. It was a cavity, a deliberate void built between the studs. I dropped the hammer and clawed at the edges of the hole with my bare hands, ripping away bigger pieces of drywall and plaster. The dust choked me, but I didn't care. I had to see. I had to know. Was this it? Was this where they'd find her? A tiny, secret tomb hidden in the walls for 5 years. Mo! The hole was big enough now. I peered into the darkness, my heart pounding a sick, heavy rhythm. I braced myself for the sight of bones, of decayed fabric. But there was no body. Inside the dark space, nestled on a bed of old insulation, was a box. A small, rusty iron box, about the size of a shoebox. It wasn't a coffin. It was a time capsule. A secret buried in the guts of the building. My hands were raw and bleeding, but I reached into the wall and pulled it out. It was heavier than it looked. The metal was cold and gritty with rust. A simple latch, stiff with age, held it shut. I carried it back into the living room and set it on the coffee table. The bloody words on my laptop screen seemed to watch me. I used the claw of the hammer to pry the latch. It resisted, groaning, then snapped open with a loud metallic pop. I lifted the lid. The smell of old paper and chemicals hit me first. Inside there was a stack of about 30 or 40 Polaroid pictures. My first thought was relief. It wasn't anything gruesome. It was just pictures. I picked up the top one. It was a picture of Lily. She was sitting on a park bench, eating an ice cream cone. She was wearing a yellow sundress, not the red one from the video. She was smiling, a big, gap-toothed grin, her face smeared with chocolate. She looked happy. I picked up the next one. Lily at a zoo, pointing at something off camera. The next, Lily on a swing set, kicking her feet high in the air. But something was wrong. In every picture, someone was with her. A man. His arm was around her in the zoo picture. He was pushing her on the swing in another. It wasn't David Crow. This man had lighter hair, a broader build. His face was always slightly out of focus, or turned away, but he was undeniably there. A constant, smiling presence in these secret moments. I flipped through them faster. A picnic. A birthday party with a small cake at the beach. Dozens of pictures. A hidden life. A whole secret family album. Who was this guy? The real father? Then I got to the last photo at the bottom of the box. It was a close-up. Just the man's arm around Lily's shoulder. She was holding a seashell up to the camera. He was wearing a t-shirt, and on his wrist he wore a bracelet. I froze. My eyes locked onto the bracelet. It wasn't just any bracelet. It was specific. Worn brown leather, braided into a thick band. The clasp was a piece of burnished silver, shaped like a stylized dragon's head biting its own tail. I knew that bracelet. I'd seen it 1,000 times. I'd seen it last week across a table at a bar. I'd seen it wrapped around the wrist of the friend who helped me move into this goddamn apartment. The friend who I was supposed to have a beer with tomorrow night. The bracelet Alex never, ever took off. The world shrank to the size of a 3-inch square of faded color. My thumb ached from how hard I was pressing it against the edge of the Polaroid. The bracelet. Braided brown leather. A silver dragon eating its own tail. Alex's bracelet. My mind refused. It couldn't be a coincidence. It had to be a coincidence. People buy the same shit all the time. It's a common design, probably from some street vendor downtown. It means nothing. The lie felt thin and weak in my head. I scrambled for my phone, my fingers slipping on the screen. The box of photos sat on the table like a bomb. My breath came in short, sharp bursts. I found his name in my contacts. Alex. The screen glowed. My thumb hovered over the call button. What was I going to say? Hey man, weird question, but did you happen to know a little girl named Lily who was murdered in my apartment 5 years ago? I couldn't. It was insane. But I had to know. I had to hear his voice. I had to hear him sound normal. I pressed the button. It rang once. Twice. My heart pounded with each ring, a sick drum beat against my ribs. The wreckage of my kitchen seemed to watch me, waiting. Mark? What's up, dude? His voice. Normal. Cheerful, even. A wave of relief washed over me, so strong it made me dizzy. I was an idiot. A sleep-deprived, terrified idiot making connections that weren't there. Hey! Hey, Alex, I said, trying to keep my own voice even. Sorry to call late. No worries. I was just watching the game. Everything all right? You sound a little weird. Yeah, I'm fine. Just this apartment, man. It's messing with my head. I needed a lead-in. Something that didn't sound completely crazy. I was doing some reading online about the guy who used to live here. David Crow. A short laugh crackled through the speaker. Oh God, are you on about your ghost stories again? I told you, every old building has a story. Don't let it get to you. The dismissal, the easy way he said ghost stories, it felt like a splash of cold water. He was right. I was being stupid. I was seeing monsters in the shadows because I was already scared of the dark. The gaslighting was working perfectly because I wanted it to. Yeah, I guess, I mumbled, feeling foolish. It's just creepy, you know. Look, just lock your doors, watch a movie, and get some sleep. We'll grab that beer tomorrow, and you can tell me all about it. Deal? The beer. Tomorrow. My friend. Normal. But the Polaroid was still on the table. The dragon's head gleamed in the dim light. I couldn't let it go. Not yet. Hey, one more thing, I said, my voice dropping. Random question. Your bracelet. Silence. It wasn't a long silence. Maybe only a second. But after his easy chatter, it was a hole in the sound. A dead spot on the line. My bracelet? He finally said. His voice had changed. The casual warmth was gone. It was flat, cautious. What about it? My blood ran cold. The shift was real. I wasn't imagining it. Where did you get it? I asked, the words feeling thick in my mouth. Another pause, longer this time. I could hear the faint sound of the TV broadcast in the background, a murmur of commentators in a distant crowd. Why are you asking me this, Mark? Just curious. I saw a picture of one like it. Looked old. My lie was clumsy, pathetic. I heard him take a breath. My dad gave it to me, a long time ago. The floor seemed to drop out from under me. I leaned on the kitchen counter for support, my knuckles white. "Your dad?" I repeated, my voice a hollow echo. I already knew the next question, and a part of me screamed not to ask it. A part of me wanted to hang up the phone and pretend this conversation never happened. But I couldn't. I was on a track now, and there was no getting off. What did your dad do? For a living?" The silence that followed was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It stretched and stretched, filled with everything he wasn't saying. I pictured him on the other end of the line, his face hardening, the friendly mask I knew so well cracking at the edges. When he finally spoke, his voice was like ice. He was a contractor, general contracting. Why? The last word was a challenge, a threat. But I barely heard it. My mind was exploding. A contractor. Alex. I started, but my throat was closed. "Look, I gotta go," he said, his voice clipped and final. "I'll see you tomorrow." He hung up. The dial tone buzzed in my ear. I slowly lowered the phone, my hand trembling. A contractor. A contractor who built things. A contractor who could have built a false wall. A secret cavity between the studs. A perfect little hiding place. A contractor with a very specific bracelet. The same one worn by the smiling man in the secret photos with Lily. The man who wasn't David Crow. The man who was Alex's father. All the pieces slammed into place with the force of a physical blow. The air rushed out of my lungs. I stumbled back, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a cry. It was never about David Crow. He was just the face. The story everyone bought. The easy answer. The real monster was in these pictures. Alex's father. And Alex knew. He helped me move in here. He steered me to this exact apartment. Was it a sick joke? Or was it something else? Lily. She wasn't haunting me. She wasn't tied to me. She was tied to this place. She was screaming from inside the walls, pointing. She was haunting this unit, waiting for someone, anyone, to finally listen. She was trying to tell a story the whole world had gotten wrong. And I had just told her killer's son that I was digging it all up. My mind raced. He said, "See you tomorrow." But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that he wouldn't wait that long. He knew that I knew. The phone call wasn't a question. It was a confirmation. I had just signed my own death warrant. I had to get out. I grabbed my keys from the hook by the door, my movements jerky and uncoordinated, my jacket, my wallet. Get out of the apartment. Run. Go to the police. Tell them. Tell them what? That my friend's dad, a contractor, is the real killer in a 5-year-old case because of a ghost and a hidden box of Polaroids? They would lock me in a padded room. But I had to try. I had to get out of this tomb. My hand was on the doorknob. I turned the deadbolt. The click was deafeningly loud in the quiet apartment. Ding-dong. The sound of the doorbell shot through me like a volt of electricity. I froze, my body rigid, my hand clamped on the knob. No, it couldn't be. Not this fast. I stood there, not breathing. Maybe they'd think I wasn't home. Maybe they'd go away. My eyes were glued to the peephole, a tiny circle of salvation or damnation. Silence descended again, thick and heavy. A minute passed. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe it was a neighbor. Ding-dong. This time it was longer, more insistent. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic prisoner. I had to know. Slowly, carefully, I leaned forward. I put my eye to the peephole. The distorted, fish-eye world outside my door swam into view. It was Alex. She was standing there, holding a brown paper bag from a takeout place. She had a smile on her face, a wide, friendly smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were cold and flat, scanning the hallway. She craned her neck, looking left, then right. Then her gaze settled back on my door. The smile was painted on. It was a mask. I pulled back from the door as if burned, my back hitting the wall. "Mark?" Her voice came through the wood, muffled but clear. It was the friendly voice from the phone, the concerned voice. "Mark, you in there?" "It's Alex. I was worried after that call. You sounded really freaked out. I brought you some food. Figured you hadn't eaten." The bag of food. The casual concern. It was a script, a performance. She was here to check on me, to see what I knew, to make sure the secret stayed buried. My mind was a whirlwind of terror. Don't open it. Don't open the door. Call 911. Now, I fumbled for my phone again, my fingers slick with sweat. But what would I say? My friend is outside my door, and I think her dad is a murderer? They'd take too long. Mark? Come on, open up. Let's talk. Her voice was still patient, but there was an edge to it now. A thread of impatience. The choice was no choice at all. I couldn't stay in here with her outside. I had to get past her. Maybe I could surprise her. Run. Just run. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the frantic beating of my heart. I unlocked the door. I pulled it open, trying to look confused, groggy. Alex? What are you doing here? Her fake smile widened. Relief flickered in her eyes. The idiot was opening the door. Told you, I was worried. You sounded like you were about to have a panic attack. She stepped inside, brushing past me, making me step back. The trap was sprung. She was in. She set the bag of food down on the arm of the couch, her eyes sweeping over the destroyed kitchen, the hole in my bedroom wall. She didn't look surprised. She looked clinical, appraising the damage. Jesus, Mark, looks like a tornado hit this place, she said, her tone still light. But her eyes weren't on the mess. They were on the iron box sitting on my coffee table, the box and the stack of Polaroids next to it. The game was over. I let the door swing shut behind me. You knew, I said. It wasn't a question. My voice was a low growl. You knew all of it, didn't you? Her smile didn't fade. It just changed. It twisted into something else. Something cold and devoid of all humor. She turned her body to face me fully. You shouldn't have found that box, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. She reached into her jacket pocket. My father was a very careful man, she went on, her eyes locked on mine, gleaming with a dark fire I'd never seen before. He sealed every loose end. He built this place. He knew its secrets. But you just had to keep digging, didn't you? Her hand came out of her pocket. She was holding a knife. A small, fixed-blade affair with a black handle. The blade was honed to a wicked point. You ruined everything! Before she could take a step, before I could even flinch, every light in the apartment flickered. A low, electric hum filled the air, vibrating in my teeth. The hum escalated into a harsh buzz, the sound of a giant insect trapped in the walls. The lights went out. Then they flashed back on, strobing violently. In the epileptic flashes of light, I saw Alex freeze, her eyes wide with a new kind of fear. Not fear of me, fear of the room itself. A metallic shriek cut through the air. The chef's knife I'd left on the kitchen counter lifted into the air, spun, and flew across the room like a silver dart, embedding itself deep in the wall just inches from Alex's head. She screamed, a high, thin sound of pure shock. The hammer I'd used on the wall lifted from the floor. It hovered for a second, then shot toward her, not to hit her, but to pin her. The claw end hooking the thick fabric of her jacket and slamming her back against the door with a loud thud. The pry bar I'd pulled from my toolbox did the same, flying from the bedroom and pinning her other side. She was trapped, crucified against the door by my own tools. The strobing stopped. The room was cast in a dim, steady glow from a single lamp. Alex was breathing in ragged, panicked gasps, her eyes darting around the room, looking for the source of the attack. Then the whisper came. It wasn't in my ear this time. It was everywhere. It was in the walls, in the air, in my head. It was the soft, clear voice of a little girl. She doesn't want you to hurt him. The whisper was gone, but the words hung in the air like smoke. She doesn't want you to hurt him. Him. Me. I was the one she was protecting. The thought was so bizarre, so completely outside the realm of possibility, that my brain just stalled. I stood there, useless, looking at the scene. Alex, crucified against my front door by a hammer and a pry bar. Her face was a mask of shock, mouth open, eyes wide, and staring at the tools pinning her jacket, inches from her skin. The dim light of the single lamp caught the wet gleam of tears on her cheeks. For a second, there was no sound, just the low hum of the refrigerator. The three of us, me, the girl trying to kill me, and the ghost of the girl her father had murdered, were frozen in a silent tableau. Then Alex screamed. It wasn't a scream of fear anymore. It was rage. A raw, furious sound that ripped through the quiet. Her face twisted, the shock replaced by pure hate. "You little bitch!" she shrieked, not at me, but at the empty room. "Get this shit off me!" The air shimmered. My stomach clenched. From the butcher block on the kitchen counter, 3 more knives lifted into the air. A paring knife, a boning knife, and the big, serrated bread knife. They hung there for a heartbeat, points aimed at her, glinting. Then they shot across the room. Thwack, thwack, thwack. They didn't hit her. They speared the fabric of her jacket, pinning the collar and the other side of her waist to the door. She was trapped completely now, her arms stuck at her sides. She struggled, pulling against the metal, and the door rattled in its frame. I stumbled back, my legs weak. Fear of Alex was being replaced by a much older, much deeper fear. The ghost wasn't just leaving Polaroids anymore, she was a physical force. Unpredictable. And she was on my side, for now. "What do we do?" I whispered to the empty air. My voice was a dry croak. I felt like a crazy person, but the evidence was nailed to my door. "We have to do something." Alex's head snapped toward me, her eyes burning. "There's no we, you idiot. There's you and there's her. And you're both dead." Her words cut through my stunned paralysis. She was right about one thing. This wasn't over. I needed help, real help. "Call the cops," I yelled, more to myself than to anyone. "I've got to call the cops." My phone. Where was my fucking phone? I dropped it after the call. I scanned the floor, my eyes darting over the mess. There. By the couch. I lunged for it, my fingers closing around the cool plastic and glass. I thumbed the power button. Nothing. I pressed it again, harder. The screen stayed black. I turned it over in my trembling hand. The back was fine, but when I looked at the screen again, I saw it. A web of cracks spider-webbing out from a single impact point in the center. It was smashed. Utterly destroyed. How? I looked from the phone to Alex. She had brushed past me when she came in. A quick, deliberate bump. That must have been it. She'd smashed it against the wall or door frame as she walked by. A casual act of sabotage before the real violence started. A cold dread spread through my chest. "Looking for this?" Alex sneered. Her voice was strained from her position, but the venom was there. "You think you can just call for help? You think you can escape? You have no idea what you've done, Mark." She took a ragged breath, a strange, triumphant smile twisting her lips. "He's coming," she hissed. "I called him right before I came over. Told him you were getting close. He's on his way." "Who?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. The name felt like poison on my tongue. "My dad," she said, savoring the word. "He's coming to fix this. To clean up your mess. He'll take care of you. And he knows how to deal with ghosts. He'll tear this whole fucking wall out if he has to. He'll take you both apart." My blood ran cold. The man from the Polaroids. The contractor. The real killer. He wasn't some ghost story from the past. He was a real person, and he was on his way here, right now. As if on cue, a low rumble filtered up from the street below, the sound of a car engine. It grew louder, then cut out abruptly. A heavy door slammed shut. He was here. My mind raced, a frantic rat in a cage. There was nowhere to run. The door was blocked by a pinned psychopath. The windows were 3 stories down to concrete. I was trapped in this small apartment. With her. And he was coming up. I and the ghost of a little girl were stuck with a maniac. And her father, the real monster, was on his way to finish the job. I stared at the door, at Alex, my heart hammering like it wanted out of my chest. This is it. This is how I die. Click. The sound was sharp and loud in the tense quiet. It came from the door. The deadbolt. It had just slid itself shut. Clack! The chain lock swung across and slid into its housing. Snap! The lock on the doorknob itself turned. Alex's eyes went wide. She stared at the hardware around her, her smug confidence vaporizing into a new wave of fear. What was that? What do you do? She stammered, looking at me. It wasn't me, I whispered, my eyes scanning the empty room. Lily. She understood. She knew he was coming. She wasn't just protecting me from Alex, she was protecting us from him. The apartment was no longer a trap, it was a fortress. We had bought ourselves time. A few minutes, maybe. We have to warn someone, I said, my voice urgent, speaking to the air. We have to find a way to get a message out. The old TV on its stand across the room flickered. It buzzed, a stark white screen of static. Then the static resolved into a grainy black and white picture. It took me a second to realize what I was looking at. A fisheye view of a hallway. The patterned carpet. The bland, beige walls. It was the feed from the security camera outside my door. My gaze was glued to the screen. To the elevator at the end of the hall, we watched in shared, terrified silence. The floor indicator numbers above the elevator doors lit up. 1, 2, 3. Ding! The sound was faint through the door, but clear on the TV's small speaker. The metal doors slid open. A man stepped out. He looked normal. Deceptively so. Middle-aged, thinning hair, a soft paunch pushing against a plain blue polo shirt. He looked like someone's dad. A guy who coached Little League and cleaned his gutters on Saturdays. He carried a large, heavy-looking duffel bag. This was him. The man from the pictures. The man who had smiled next to a little girl before burying her in a wall. He started walking down the hallway, his steps calm and measured. His eyes were fixed on my apartment door. This wasn't a panicked visit. This was a professional at work. He stopped just out of the peephole's range and looked up, directly at the security camera. For a chilling moment, he just stared into the lens. Into our room, a blank, unreadable expression on his face. He knew we were watching. Then he stepped aside. He wasn't alone. 2 more men stepped out of the elevator. They were big, broad-shouldered guys in dirty work jackets and steel-toed boots. They moved with a heavy, purposeful energy. One was holding a long, rusty crowbar. The other had an identical one, and a coiled length of thick rope slung over his shoulder. My breath hitched in my throat. The duffel bag. The crowbars. The rope. This wasn't a rescue mission for his daughter. This was a demolition crew. A cleanup team. They had come to get the box, to silence me, and to pry a little girl's bones out of the wall for a second time. The fortress had just become a tomb. On the screen, the father gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Then he reached out and his fist filled the camera's view before the feed cut to black. The black screen of the dead TV was my whole world for a second. Then the world came back. Boom! The sound was so loud the floor shook. The knives pinning Alex's jacket rattled against the door. She screamed, a short, sharp gasp. Boom! Boom! A fist. A boot. Something heavy and angry was hitting the other side of my front door. Mark! Open this door! Open it right now! The voice was muffled but full of a terrifying authority. It was him. The father. He's gonna kill you, Alex hissed, her eyes wide with a mix of terror and glee. He's gonna tear you apart! My eyes darted around the room. A weapon. I needed a weapon. Something. The floor lamp was the closest thing. It was heavy. With a solid metal base, I lunged for it, my hands wrapping around its thin pole, yanking the plug from the wall socket. It was awkward, unbalanced. A stupid weapon. But it was something. The dead TV screen crackled to life again, not with a picture, but with sound. A thin, high-pitched humming. A little girl's tune, the kind you hum when you're drawing. From the Bluetooth speaker on the counter, a different sound started. A slow, tinny music box melody. The two sounds combined. A dissonant, chilling chorus playing to the beat of the pounding on the door. Lily was fighting back with the only weapons she had. Noise and dread. It wasn't working. Crack! A sound like a bone snapping. My eyes snapped to the center of the door. A dark, rusted metal tip punched through the wood just a few inches from Alex's head. Splinters exploded into the room. It was a crowbar. They weren't trying to pick the locks. They were going to dismantle the doorframe. They were going to walk right through it. The locks were locked, but they were just metal in wood. They wouldn't hold. The magic was inside. Lily's world. The world outside was just physics and brute force, and it was coming in. I backed away, dragging the lamp with me. Alex was screaming at him now. "Dad, get me out of here! He's crazy, Dad! Get this shit off me!" With a final, awful shriek of tortured wood, the door didn't open. It exploded inward. The entire door, frame and all, blew into the room in a cloud of plaster dust and splintered pine. It crashed to the floor, taking the chain and the deadbolt with it. My world shrank to the three figures framed in the broken doorway. The father stood in the middle, just like on the TV. Polo shirt, paunch, thinning hair. His face was a calm mask of irritation, like a man dealing with a plumbing problem. He didn't even look at his daughter, pinned and frantic. His eyes found me instantly, cold, empty. The two other men flanked him, the big guys in work jackets. One held the crowbar that had just violated my home. The other flexed his hands, his knuckles thick and scarred. They looked at the scene. The knives, Alex, me holding a lamp like a spear, with a practiced disinterest. This was a job. We were the mess. The father finally glanced at his daughter, his expression not shifting one bit. His voice was flat, without emotion. "Deal with her," he said, nodding towards Alex. Then his dead eyes settled back on me. "Bring him to me." That was it. No panic, no rescue, just orders. The two goons stepped into the room, over the wreckage of my door. They didn't run. They walked, like they owned the place. They split up, coming at me from two angles. I gripped the lamp, my knuckles white. My heart was a drum in my ears. Suddenly, the light bulb in the ceiling fixture above them exploded. A shower of hot glass rained down. The bigger of the two goons flinched, raising an arm to shield his face. A wind, impossible and cold, whipped through the apartment. It slammed the kitchen cabinets open and shut, bang, bang, bang. It howled past my ears, a furious, invisible presence. Lily. She was throwing everything she had at them. The ceiling fan above them began to wobble. It wasn't the wind, it was groaning, the metal housing creaking. One screw popped, then another. The second goon, the one with the crowbar, looked up. His eyes went wide. It was too late. The entire fan assembly tore loose from the ceiling. It dropped, blade spinning lazily from the momentum. It crashed down on the first goon's head and shoulders with a sickening, wet crunch. He collapsed without a sound, a heap of meat and canvas under a tangle of metal and plastic. The other one didn't hesitate. He roared and charged, not at the ghost, but at me. He was faster than he looked. I swung the lamp, a clumsy, desperate arc. He batted it away with one arm like it was a toy. The metal pole bent. The lampshade tore off. A hand, like a steel clamp, grabbed the front of my shirt. He lifted me off my feet, slamming me back against the wall. The back of my head hit the drywall with a muffled thud. Stars exploded behind my eyes. My breath left my body in a whoosh. He held me there, his face inches from mine. His breath stank of coffee and cigarettes. "You're a real problem," he growled. Through the ringing in my ears, I saw the father. He hadn't moved. He watched the goon fall, watched me get captured with the same flat disinterest. Now he walked calmly past the body on the floor. He stepped over the wreckage and stood in front of his daughter. With quick, efficient movements, he grabbed the handle of the bread knife and yanked it out. Then, the boning knife. The paring knife. The hammer. The pry bar. He tossed each one aside. They clattered on the floor. Alex stumbled forward, free, rubbing her wrists. She looked at me, pinned against the wall, and a vicious smile spread across her face. The father ignored us both. His gaze drifted past me, into the empty space by the kitchen. He was looking at her. At Lily, a flicker of something that wasn't boredom crossed his face. Annoyance. "Still here, are you?" he said to the empty air. His voice was low, conversational. "A little ghost in the machine. You think you're safe in here." His eyes came back to me, but he wasn't talking to me. "I built this place. I know its secrets. I know yours." He stepped over to the heavy duffel bag his men had brought in. He reached into it and pulled something out. Not a gun. Not a knife. It was a book, old, leather-bound, the cover worn smooth with age. It was thick, heavy. He held it with a strange reverence. The goon holding me grunted, a sound of recognition. The father opened it. The pages were yellowed, brittle. They weren't filled with words. They were covered in symbols. Sharp, angular designs drawn in faded black ink. Geometric patterns that seemed to shift and writhe. Oakenfield, have my vision? The edge of my vision. Some looked like astrological signs. Others like scrambled circuits. They felt wrong. They felt dangerous. He thought burying her would be enough, the father said, still speaking to the ghost I couldn't see. He ran a thumb over one of the symbols. Primitive. But I do my homework. I clean up my messes. He looked straight at the empty spot by the kitchen. This time, he said softly, a cold promise in his voice, I'll make sure you're erased for good. My blood froze. The crowbars, the rope, the goons. That was just for me, for the body. The book was for her. This wasn't just a cleanup job. This was an exorcism. And he was the exorcist. That book wasn't just a threat, it was a sentence. The goon holding me against the wall grunted, a low sound of approval, as if his boss had just pulled out the one tool needed to finish the job. The paper of the open pages looked corpse yellow under the single bare bulb that hadn't exploded. The symbols on them were a disease for the eyes. The father didn't look at the book. He didn't need to. He knew the words by heart. His lips peeled back from his teeth, not in a smile, but in a dry, preparatory motion. He was still looking at that empty space by the kitchen, at the ghost I couldn't see. You think you're clever, he murmured, his voice a low scrape. Hiding in the wires? In the walls. I had a man, a very smart man, explain it to me. How you work. How to pull you out. He drew a breath, and the air in the room seemed to get sucked towards him. Then he started talking. It wasn't a language. It was the sound of rocks grinding together in the dark, guttural. A string of sharp clicking noises and long, drawn-out groans that seemed to tear at the edges of his throat. Each syllable felt heavy, a physical weight in the air. The humming from the dead TV screen wavered. It pitched higher, into a thin, agonizing shriek, like metal tearing. Then, with a pop, it went silent. The music box melody playing from the Bluetooth speaker on the counter slowed, the notes bending and warping, a dying, tinny wail. Then, it too stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. It was thick. Absolute. The cold wind that had been whipping through the apartment vanished. The kitchen cabinets stopped banging. The air became still and heavy, pressing in on me, making the inside of my ears throb. Even the faint buzz of the remaining light bulb seemed to have died. Lily's presence, the furious protective energy that had crashed a ceiling fan onto a man's skull, was gone. Fading. Being unwritten. The goon holding me shifted his weight. He was enjoying this. See? He breathed, his foul breath hitting my face. Boss, don't fuck around. The father's chanting continued, a relentless, monotonous drone. A small glass sitting on the kitchen counter, half full of water, suddenly cracked from top to bottom with a sharp tink. A line of water seeped out onto the formica. It was a pathetic, desperate sound. A last gasp. The father paused, his eyes narrowing. He seemed to be listening to something I couldn't hear. A faint smile touched his lips. It was the most terrible thing I had seen all night. Ah, he said, the chanting stopping. The thick air remained. So that's how it is. You're not just in the walls. You're anchored. You latched onto something. Something of yours. He lowered the book, his gaze sweeping across my small, cluttered apartment. It was a predator's gaze, scanning for the weakest member of the herd. His eyes passed over the couch, the TV, the wreckage of the door. They lingered on the bookcase full of my paperbacks. Then he looked at the small end table beside the armchair. His eyes locked. "It has to be destroyed," he said, more to himself than to anyone else. "Pulverize the anchor and the echo disappears. The connection breaks." He took a step towards the end table. My blood ran cold. On it, next to a stack of mail, was the old burner phone, the one I'd found in her room, the one with the cracked screen. The one that had started all of this. Lily's phone. "There you are," the father whispered. He looked back at the goon who was still on the floor, the one buried under the ceiling fan. He noticed the crowbar lying nearby. Without taking his eyes off the phone, he pointed. "Alex, get me that." Alex, who had been standing by the ruined doorway, looking like a spectator at a bloody sporting event, flinched. But she obeyed. She skirted around the body and the debris, picked up the heavy iron crowbar, and brought it to him. She held it out like an offering. He took it. The weight of it in his hand looked natural, comfortable. "He's gonna smash it," Alex said, her voice full of a sick, breathless excitement. "He's gonna smash her right out of the house." The father took a position over the end table. He wasn't looking at me. He wasn't looking at his daughter. He was looking at that cheap, cracked piece of plastic. He raised the crowbar high over his head, the bare light glinting off the rusted metal. My mind didn't think. It just screamed. A silent, useless scream. That phone was all that was left. It was her voice. It was her last connection. Smashing it felt like killing her all over again. The goon holding me adjusted his grip, anticipating the end. His thumb pressed into my windpipe, just a little. The father's arms tensed, preparing for the downward swing. No, no. A wire snapped in my brain. All the fear, all the paralysis, boiled over into a single point of pure animal rage. I opened my mouth and sank my teeth into the fleshy part of the goon's forearm holding my shirt. He bellowed, a shocked, furious sound of pain. His grip loosened for a fraction of a second. It was all I needed. I shoved with all my strength, twisting out of his weakened grasp. I didn't run for the door. I didn't look for a weapon. I launched myself forward, a clumsy, desperate tackle aimed right at the father. My shoulder hit him square in the ribs. He let out a grunt of surprise, his balance broken. We went down together in a heap of limbs, crashing into the flimsy bookcase. Paperback books rained down on us. The crowbar flew from his hand, skittering across the wood floor and slamming into the far wall. The book, the horrible book of symbols, sailed through the air, landing splayed open on the floor a few feet away. The goon was coming for me, his face purple with rage, his arm bleeding. The father was trying to push me off him, cursing. It was chaos. Punches and grunts and the sound of my own blood roaring in my ears. I didn't see Alex move. Amid the struggle, her motion was a thing of quiet purpose. She stepped around us. She didn't go for the crowbar. She didn't help her father. She bent down and picked up the book. The goon had me by the hair, pulling my head back. The father was on his knees, gasping for breath. The world slowed down. I saw Alex hold the book, her eyes scanning the open pages. She wasn't just looking, she was reading. Her lips moved silently. Then, with a chilling calmness, she flipped a few pages. Not forward, back. She found what she was looking for. Her voice, when it came, was nothing like her father's guttural chanting. It was clear, high, and sharp as broken glass. She read a short, clipped phrase from the yellowed page. A different language. A different purpose. A line of pale, sickly green light etched itself onto the floorboards in front of her. It drew itself into a perfect circle, about 6 feet wide. It didn't illuminate the room. It seemed to suck the light into it, glowing with a cold, chemical energy. It looked like a toxic spill. The father saw it. He stopped trying to get up. His mouth fell open. "Alex, what are you? That's not the right page. Stop." She ignored him. Her eyes were fixed on the center of the glowing ring. She read another line from the book, her voice steady and commanding. The air inside the circle shimmered. It warped like heat haze rising from asphalt. A shape began to form in the middle of it. It was translucent, made of smoke and memory and static. The shape of a small girl, her nightgown flickering in and out of existence. Lily. She wasn't a whirlwind of fury anymore. She wasn't an invisible force of vengeance. She was just a little girl, trapped and terribly visible. Her hands were pressed against an invisible wall at the edge of the circle. Her face was a mask of silent, screaming terror. She was solidified, caught, a butterfly pinned to a board. The goon let go of my hair, staring. The father was frozen, his face a mess of confusion and dawning horror. Alex closed the book with a soft thump. She looked at the terrified, trapped spirit of the child she had tormented in life. A slow, triumphant smile spread across her face. It was a smile of pure, absolute ownership. Then she looked up from the ghost. She looked right at me, and the smile didn't waver. The smile on Alex's face didn't waver. It wasn't a smile of happiness. It was a smile of a job done, of a long-awaited victory. It was the nastiest thing I had ever seen. The sickly green light from the circle on the floor painted her face in shades of poison. Inside that ring of light, Lily was no longer a storm. She was just a girl. She looked solid, real, her form no longer flickering like bad reception. She was pressed against the invisible wall of the circle, her small hands flat against the barrier I couldn't see. Her mouth was open in a scream that made no sound. Her terror was a physical thing in the room, a pressure that pushed against my chest. Alex let out a little laugh. It was a dry, ugly sound. "See?" she said, her voice light, conversational. "Not so tough when she's pulled out of the walls, is she? She's just a little girl." The words sliced through the frozen air. The goon, Bruno, who had been holding me just moments before, took a step back from the circle, his face pale under the grime. He looked from the trapped ghost to Alex, and then back again. He'd been hired for a fight, not for this. This was something else. I got to my feet, my body screaming with aches from the fall. My mind struggled to connect the dots. Alex. The book. The circle. Her father's shock. "You," I managed to say, the words scraping my throat. "You did this, not him." The father pushed himself up, leaning against the ruined bookcase. He ignored me completely. He was staring at his daughter, his expression a mixture of awe and fear. "Alex," he breathed, "how did you... the binding ritual? I never showed you that page." "You didn't have to," she said, not taking her eyes off me. She held the book clutched to her chest like a Bible. "I read ahead. You were too busy trying to banish her. Too simple. Too sloppy. You don't banish a pest. You catch it. Then you kill it." My gaze shot from her face to the father's. The pieces clicked into place with a series of horrible, metal clanks. The deliberate destruction. The armed men. The book. This wasn't a desperate attempt to talk to a lost daughter. This was an extermination. "Monsters," I whispered. My own voice sounded distant. "You're all monsters." Alex's smile widened. "No, we're just tired." The father seemed to recover his nerve. He straightened up, his eyes now hard as stone. He looked at the crowbar, still lying on the floor. With a grunt, he bent down and picked it up. The heavy steel seemed to give him back his authority. He held it loosely, pointing the tip at the circle on the floor. "This whole thing," he said, his voice a low rumble of pure exhaustion and hate. "It was all a trap. Not for you." He finally looked at me, and there was no pity in his eyes, only irritation, like I was a piece of garbage that had gotten in his way. It was for her. He gestured with the crowbar at the terrified, silent shape of his younger daughter. "You have no idea," he spat. "The day she died, she didn't leave. Not really. She stayed. A stain. A bad memory that learned how to push things. At first it was small, a whisper in an empty room, a door slamming. Then things started to break. Phones would fry. The plumbing in our house burst, flooding the whole first floor. A deal, a multi-million-dollar deal I had worked on for a year, collapsed because every file on my computer corrupted the night before the final meeting. He took a step, walking the edge of the green circle like a warden patrolling a cell. Lily's spectral form shrank away from him, pressing herself harder against the far side of her cage. We had people come. Priests, mediums, frauds. Nothing worked. They all said the same thing. She was anchored to something, a physical object that tied her to this world. But we got rid of everything, every toy, every drawing, every piece of clothing. We cleaned out her room until it was just white walls, but she was still there. We couldn't find the anchor. His voice dropped, full of a cold, hard logic, so we couldn't get rid of the ghost. The room was quiet except for his voice and the faint electric hum of the circle. My blood ran cold. The burner phone, the one I found, the one that started it all, her anchor. Alex took over the story, her tone full of a sick, prideful excitement. We knew she was attached to this apartment building. It was the last place she was happy. So we bought the whole damn floor. Waited. We needed someone to find the anchor for us, someone who wouldn't ask questions, someone lonely. Her eyes bored into me. We saw you move in, she said. No family visiting, no friends helping with the boxes. The perfect tenant. A blank slate. So I introduced myself, gave you that sad story about my poor dead sister, made you feel sorry for me. My mind flashed back. Alex in the hallway. Her accidental mention of strange noises. Her gift of the Bluetooth speaker that played Lily's song. It wasn't a warning. It was bait. You did the rest, the father rumbled, his knuckles white on the crowbar. You felt her presence. You got curious. You looked for the source. You dug through the walls, and you found her phone. You brought the anchor out into the open. All we had to do was wait for you to make enough noise to confirm it. The reality of it hit me like a physical blow. I stumbled back a step. I wasn't a victim of a haunting. I was a tool. A hunting dog sent into the bushes to flush out the prey. Every moment of fear, every sleepless night, every desperate attempt to understand what was happening, it was all part of their script. They had watched me, manipulated me, and used my own isolation against me. I was just the janitor they hired to clean up their mess. The rage that had saved me moments before was gone, replaced by a hollow, sickening despair. They had played me from the very beginning. The father stopped his pacing. He stood before the glowing circle, looking down at the small, trapped girl. He raised the crowbar. It wasn't a quick motion. It was slow, deliberate. An executioner taking his position. It has to be destroyed, he said, repeating the same words from before. But now I understood. He wasn't talking about the phone anymore. Pulverize the anchor, and the echo disappears. But if you pulverize the echo itself, when it's pulled from its anchor, the connection shatters forever. He was going to smash her. Not the phone. He was going to smash the ghost itself. Time to end this, he grunted, positioning his feet. Alex watched, her face glowing with anticipation. Bruno, the goon, just stood by the door, his eyes wide. He wasn't a part of this anymore. He was just a witness. My brain screamed, no, this couldn't happen. This couldn't be the end. She was a child, a terrified child they had tormented in life and were now about to obliterate in death. I didn't care that she had wrecked my apartment or scared the hell out of me. In that moment, all I saw was a little girl cornered by monsters. My eyes darted around the room. The smashed bookcase, the broken door, the goon on the floor, groaning under the ceiling fan. Then I saw it, bolted to the wall near the kitchen entrance, a red cylinder, a fire extinguisher. My body moved before my mind could argue. I didn't think about the father's size, or the crowbar in his hand, or the other goon by the door. I lunged. 3 quick steps across the living room floor. I grabbed the heavy extinguisher, unhooked it from its mount with a loud metallic clang, and spun around. The father's head snapped up. His eyes widened in surprise as I hefted the heavy cylinder. Don't you? I didn't aim for him. That was a fool's move. He was bigger, stronger, and he had a crowbar. I didn't aim for Alex. She was too far away. I aimed for the one thing they weren't protecting. With a raw yell that tore from my lungs, I swung the fire extinguisher in a wide, desperate arc and launched it. It flew through the air, end over end, a red missile of pure desperation. It wasn't aimed at a person. It was aimed at the large picture window that overlooked the street. The sound was explosive. It wasn't the tinkling of broken glass. It was a deafening roar, as the entire pane of tempered glass disintegrated at once, imploding into a million tiny cubes. The night air rushed in, cold and sharp. The sounds of the city, a distant siren, the hum of traffic, poured into the horrifying silence of the apartment. Light from a street lamp below flooded the room, casting long, distorted shadows. The father flinched back, instinctively raising an arm to shield his face from the shower of glass. Alex cried out in shock. Bruno ducked. It worked. The spell was broken. For a split second, I felt a surge of triumph. But something else happened. The sudden rush of air, the violent change in pressure, the shattering of the room's containment. It hit the green circle of light like a hammer. The perfect ring flickered violently. It pulsed once, twice, the green light flaring so brightly it hurt my eyes. And then the humming stopped. For a heartbeat, there was nothing. The circle went dark. The ghost of Lily was gone. A wave of relief so powerful it made my knees weak washed over me. It was over. She was free. I was wrong. A noise came from the center of the room, from where the circle had been. It wasn't a girlish scream. It was a low, guttural growl, like the sound of stone grinding on stone. A sound that vibrated through the floorboards and up into my bones. Slowly, a form began to coalesce in the darkness. Not the translucent, terrified girl from before. This was something else. It was thicker, darker, like smoke and tar being poured into a human shape. The gentle nightgown was gone, replaced by shifting shadows that writhed like snakes. The shape solidified. It was Lily. But it was not Lily. She stood to her full, small height. The fear was gone from her face, replaced by a void. She lifted her head, and her eyes found me. They weren't the clear, frightened eyes of a child anymore. They were two pits of solid, bottomless black. No sclera, no iris, no pupil. Just pure, absolute darkness. The trap hadn't destroyed her. The broken ritual hadn't freed her. It had changed her. It had unleashed her. Her mouth opened, and this time, a sound came out. It was a shriek that was not human, a sound of pure, concentrated rage that clawed at the air and made the remaining light bulb in the ceiling fixture buzz and explode in a shower of sparks, plunging the room into near-total darkness, lit only by the cold, distant city glow from the shattered window. The father, Alex, the goon, they were all frozen, staring at the thing they had created, and it was staring right back at them. The shriek tore through my skull. It wasn't a sound made of air and vocal cords. It was the sound of grinding metal, of tearing fault lines deep in the earth. My hands flew to my ears, a useless gesture. The noise was inside me, vibrating in my teeth, shaking my bones. The shattered window rattled in its frame. Dust sifted from the ceiling. Then, silence. A heavy, listening silence. The thing that was Lily stood in the center of the floor. The city light from behind carved her silhouette, but it was the darkness in front of me that held all the power. In the dimness, I saw the father, his face a mask of disbelief. Alex, beside him, had her hand clamped over her mouth, her knuckles white. The swagger was gone. The smug victory was gone. In its place was raw, undiluted fear, the kind of fear you see in an animal that knows the trap is sprung. What is this?" Alex whispered. Her voice was thin, a tiny thread in the vast, cold emptiness of the room. The father didn't answer. He just stared at the small, dark figure. His crowbar hung loosely in his hand, a forgotten prop. His gaze flickered from the thing that was his daughter to the useless book Alex held. "The binding it broke," he said. The words were not for us. He was talking to himself, trying to solve an equation while the answer was already burning the house down around him. It didn't release her. It untethered her from the anchor. It fed her. Oh, God! She's stronger. As if in response to his words, the temperature in the room plunged. It wasn't a gradual chill. It was a sudden, violent drop, like being thrown into a walk-in freezer. The air hit my lungs and burned. I saw my own breath fog in front of my face, a pale cloud in the gloom. I glanced at the others. They were breathing smoke, too, puffs of white vapor from panicked mouths. This wasn't natural. This was a violation. My eyes fell on Bruno, the goon by the door. He hadn't moved. He was just standing there, his cheap suit looking ridiculous in this new, freezing hell. His mouth was slightly open. His eyes were wide. Then he started to shake. It began in his hands, a fine tremor. It moved up his arms, to his shoulders. His head began to jerk back and forth in short, violent spasms. A low, gurgling sound came from his throat. He wasn't having a seizure. He was being shaken by a force I couldn't see. His eyes, wide with a terror that went beyond sanity, rolled back in his head until only the whites were showing. Alex let out a choked cry. "Do something!" But the father was frozen, his face slack with horror. A thin trickle of dark blood leaked from Bruno's right ear, then his left. It ran down his neck, staining his collar. He took one stiff, puppet-like step forward, then another. His body convulsed one last time, a hard, snapping motion. Blood spurted from his nostrils. He collapsed to the floor, not like a man falling, but like a sack of meat being dropped. The sound was wet. Final. He lay still, a dark pool spreading slowly from under his head onto the hardwood floor. Nobody screamed. The air was too cold to carry a scream. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. My mind was a blank wall of static. One thought managed to push through. Run. But my feet were welded to the floor. The thing that was Lily turned its head, a slow, deliberate motion. Its gaze swept past the dead man on the floor as if he were furniture. The total blackness of its eyes settled on Alex, and its shadow moved. It wasn't a normal shadow, cast by the light from the window. This shadow peeled itself off the floor. It grew, stretching up the wall behind Lily, no longer mirroring her small form. It became a towering, distorted shape of a man, then a spider, then something with too many joints. It was a fluid nightmare painted in pure black. Its arms, long, thin tendrils of darkness, uncoiled from the main mass on the wall. They crept along the floor, silent and flat, slithering like ink spills toward Alex and her father. "The book!" the father yelled, his voice cracking. "The containment verse! Read it!" Alex fumbled with the old volume, her fingers shaking too badly to turn the brittle pages. I can't see! It's too dark!" "Just read it!" he roared, finally breaking his paralysis. He took a step back, pulling Alex with him. They stumbled over a broken piece of the bookcase. The shadow arms didn't slow. They were closing the distance. The father shoved Alex behind him. He raised the crowbar, gripping it with two hands, his knuckles a burst of white in the gloom. He was a man with a stick facing a tidal wave. "Stay back, you little bitch," he snarled, a pathetic echo of his earlier authority. "I'll send you back to hell myself." The shadow arms ignored him. They flowed around him like water, their tips rising from the floor like cobra heads. They weren't aiming for him. They were aiming for Alex. She shrieked, a high, thin sound of pure animal terror, as one of the tendrils wrapped around her ankle. She dropped the book. It hit the floor with a dull thud. Another tendril wrapped around her waist. She was lifted from her feet, her legs kicking uselessly in the air. "Dad!" The shadow dragged her across the floor. She scrabbled at the boards, her fingernails making horrible scraping sounds. The main mass of the shadow on the wall seemed to open, like a mouth. It pulled her in. Her final scream was cut off instantly, not choked, but just gone. One moment she was there, a screaming, struggling person. The next, she was gone, absorbed into the flat, featureless darkness on the wall. There was no sound, no struggle, just absence. The silence that followed was worse than any scream. The father stared at the spot where his daughter had been. His mouth hung open. A string of saliva dripped from his lip. The crowbar fell from his hands and clattered onto the floor. "Alex?" he whispered. The great shadow on the wall seemed to shrink for a moment, and a low sound slid through the room. It sounded like a chuckle, a dry, cold, ancient sound. That sound broke him. A raw, guttural roar of pure rage and grief ripped from the father's chest. He lunged for the crowbar, snatched it up, and charged at the small figure of Lily. "I'll kill you!" he screamed, his voice dissolving into a sob. He swung the heavy steel bar. He was big, and the swing was powerful, a wild arc meant to smash, to obliterate, but it passed right through her. The crowbar met no resistance. The father's momentum carried him forward, stumbling past the spot where Lily stood. He spun around, his face contorted into a mask of madness. Lily hadn't moved. She hadn't even flinched. The crowbar had passed through her, as if she were smoke. The shadow on the wall, however, had moved. It detached itself completely, a massive, swirling cloud of black that filled the space between the father and the door. It blocked the only way out. It engulfed the body of the goon, which vanished into its depths. The father backed away from Lily, his wild eyes flicking between the small girl and the towering mass of animate darkness that now trapped him. He was cornered, helpless. The shadow surged forward. It didn't have arms this time. It moved as one single entity, a wave of nothingness that washed over him. He raised the crowbar in a futile attempt to ward it off, a child's toy against the night. He opened his mouth to scream, but the darkness filled it. It covered him, enveloped him, swallowed him whole. He disappeared, just as his daughter had. Silently. Completely. The shadow hung in the air for a moment, pulsing gently. Then it flowed back across the room, pouring itself back into the small shape standing in the center. It condensed, shrinking until it was just her shadow once more, lying properly on the floor behind her. The cold in the room receded. The air warmed, no longer burning my lungs. The oppressive weight lifted. I could hear the distant city sounds again through the shattered window. A car horn, a far-off siren. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking violently. My whole body was shaking. I was alive. I was alone. Slowly, the light from the ceiling fixture flickered back on. One bulb had survived. It cast a weak yellow glow over the scene. The room was a wreck. Smashed furniture, broken glass, a book lying open on the floor. There were 2 dark, wet stains on the wood. But there were no bodies. Alex, her father, Bruno, they were just gone. In the center of it all, Lily stood. She looked like a little girl again. Her form was solid, her nightgown clean and white. She turned to face me. The void in her eyes was gone. They were just eyes now. The clear, sad eyes of a child. She looked small. Lost. I stared at her, my mind unable to process anything. Was it over? Did she get what she wanted? Was I next? The questions were a meaningless buzz in my head. She took a small step toward me. I flinched, stumbling back until my shoulders hit the wall. I slid down to the floor, my legs giving out. I had nothing left. No fight, no will to run. I just sat there, waiting, but she stopped. She stood about 10 feet away, her head tilted slightly, watching me. There was no anger in her face, no malice, just a profound, unending sadness. Then she did something. She raised her small, pale hand, her finger, thin and delicate, extended. She wasn't pointing at me. She was pointing past me, toward the mess of drywall and splintered wood where I'd first found the phone, at the small black object lying half buried in the debris. Her anchor. Her prison. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. No shriek. No whisper. But I heard the word in my head, as clearly as if she'd screamed it. A single, desperate, silent plea. Destroy it. Destroy it. The words were not a command. They were a prayer. A soundless plea that echoed in the ruin of my mind. My body was a live wire. Every muscle twitched. My heart hammered a frantic, uneven rhythm against my ribs. I was on the floor, the rough grain of the wood pressing into my back, my legs useless beneath me. It's over. The thought was a life raft in a sea of blood and shadow. It had to be over. The monsters who had tormented her were gone, consumed by their own creation. Now all that was left was the echo, the ghost of a little girl and her prison. Destroy it. I pushed myself up. My arms trembled with the effort. My knees screamed as I got to my feet. The room was a disaster zone. A battlefield. Broken wood. Shattered glass. The dark, ugly stains on the floor where life had ended. but the oppressive cold was gone. The air was just air again, thick with dust but breathable. Through the broken window the city breathed, its distant hum a promise of a world that was still sane. My eyes found her. Lily. She stood perfectly still in the center of the wreckage, a small, white figure in a field of gray. The black voids in her eyes were gone. They were just a child's eyes now, wide and impossibly sad. She watched me, waiting. I took a step, then another. My legs felt like they were filled with wet sand. I moved toward the pile of drywall and splintered 2x4s where this whole nightmare had started. There it was. Half buried in white dust, a small black rectangle. The phone. Her anchor. One final act. Smash it. Break the connection. Let her go. Let her find whatever peace a soul like hers could find. My hand reached out, fingers trembling, about to close around the cold plastic. I could almost feel the release, the final quiet sigh, as her spirit unraveled and drifted away. "Don't!" The words slammed into my skull. It was not a plea this time. It was a spike of ice. I froze, my fingers hovering an inch from the phone, my breath caught in my throat. I slowly turned my head, looking back at the girl. She hadn't moved. Her sad eyes were locked on mine. The voice came again, clearer this time, a perfect transmission from her mind to mine. Not a whisper, but a thought laid bare. "If you destroy it, I will disappear. I'll be gone. But my mother is still trapped." My own thoughts short-circuited. A torrent of questions with no shape. Mother? What mother? What is she talking about? It made no sense. This was about Lily. It had always been about Lily. Where? I mouthed the word, my voice a dry rasp. Where is your mother? Her small, pale hand lifted again. Her finger, a thin shard of bone in the dim light, didn't point at the phone this time. It pointed to the floor a few feet away, to the old, leather-bound book Alex had dropped. In the book, I stared at it. The book lay sprawled open, its spine broken. It looked like any other piece of trash in the room, just old paper and dead leather. But as I watched, something changed. A light began to bloom from its pages. It wasn't a bright light. It was a sick, dull red glow, the color of a dying ember, of old blood held up to a weak bulb. It pulsed. A slow, hateful rhythm. Thump-thump. Thump-thump. Like a heart. My blood ran cold. A different kind of cold than before. This wasn't the vast, empty cold of the void. This was the stale, damp cold of a sealed tomb. My mind started to race, stumbling over the facts, trying to force them into a new shape. The father. Alex's father. His raw terror when the binding of the book broke. His frantic screams for Alex to read the containment verse. Containment verse. Not an exorcism verse. A containment verse. You don't contain something you want to get rid of. You contain something you want to keep locked up. The pieces clicked into place, with the sickening finality of a cell door slamming shut. Oh, God. The ritual. The whole sick performance. It was never about banishing the ghost of a little girl. It was never about setting things right. It was about keeping the cage locked. Alex's father hadn't just been some occult enthusiast dabbling in things he didn't understand. He was a jailer. The book wasn't a weapon against Lily. It was a prison. And the prisoner wasn't the daughter. It was the mother. The woman he'd murdered along with her child. He'd bound her spirit, her rage, her hate into that book. Sealed it away. Lily was just an echo. A psychic stain tied to the phone. A side effect he couldn't scrub clean. The real threat, the thing he truly feared, was what he had trapped between those leather covers. And we had just let it out. The red glow from the book intensified, casting long, dancing shadows across the floor. A low hum started, a vibration that I felt in the soles of my feet and the fillings in my teeth. The air grew heavy, charged with a new kind of malice. Hot and rancid, I was trapped again, not by a door, but by a choice. Destroy the phone, and Lily vanishes, leaving her mother's vengeful spirit to do God knows what. Or approach the book. Approach the source of that pulsing, hateful red light. I looked at Lily. Her face was a mask of childlike grief. She wanted her mother. Whatever her mother had become, she wanted her. There was no choice. Not really. I took a step toward the book, my heart pounding a sick counter-rhythm to the pulsing light. The hum grew louder, a deep bass note that rattled my bones. The air was thick, like breathing in smoke from a fire fed by old meat. My hand shook as I reached down, not toward the paper, but toward the cracked leather cover. The instant my skin made contact, a searing heat shot up my arm. I cried out, recoiling, but my fingers wouldn't let go. It was like grabbing a live power line. The book burned. It felt like it had been sitting in a furnace, a solid block of white-hot hate. Then the pages began to move. It wasn't a gentle turning. They flipped with a furious, violent speed. A blur of yellowed paper and dark script. Thwip, 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 thwip. The sound was angry, a deck of cards shuffled by a madman. They ripped past diagrams of circles and symbols, past text written in a language I didn't recognize, until finally, thud, they slammed to a stop on the very last page. It was blank, or it had been. As I stared, paralyzed by the heat and the hum, ink began to bleed up from the fibers of the paper. Dark lines spiderwebbed across the page, not forming words, but an image. An eye. A cheekbone. A mouth twisted open in a silent, unending scream of pure rage. A woman's face. It stared up at me, not from the page, but from within it, as if a real face was pressed against a thin sheet of glass, desperate to break through. The eyes were black pits of annihilation, burning with a hatred so profound it felt like a physical force. Then the second voice hammered its way into my head. It wasn't Lily's sad, clear thought. This was a shriek of rusted metal. The sound of gravestones grinding together, a voice that had been screaming in the dark for years. Thank you for releasing me. The heat in my hand lessened for a fraction of a second. A wave of relief so powerful it almost made my knees buckle washed over me. I did it. I freed her. The voice scraped across my mind again, twisting the relief into pure, liquid terror. Now, it is my turn to help my daughter. The hateful eyes on the page seemed to focus, to look right through me, to see the empty spaces inside my soul. Find a warmer place to stay. The words hit the inside of my skull and shattered everything. Not a plea, not a thought, a statement of intent. The book in my hand was no longer a furnace. The heat was gone, replaced by a cold that sank straight through my skin and into my bones. A dead cold. Ink. That's what I saw. Black ink bled from the screaming face on the page. It wasn't just spreading anymore. It was rising. A thick, dark smoke, smelling of old graves and burnt wires, poured from the book. It wasn't smoke. It was something heavier. Something with substance. It coiled in the air, a tornado of soot and rage turning in on itself, growing thicker, darker. I tried to let go of the book. My fingers wouldn't obey. I tried to throw it. My arm was stone. The black whirlwind spun faster, tighter, a pillar of pure hate rising from the pages. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't an echo. It was a presence. A physical weight in the air that pushed the dust and debris away in a perfect circle around me. The hum in my teeth grew into a low growl that vibrated through the floor. I was at the center of the storm. It rose up, towering over me, a featureless column of shadow. Then it lunged. Not at me, at the phone. The black mass shot across the room and slammed into the small rectangle lying in the plaster dust. There was no sound of impact, just a sudden, sharp crack, a sound like a frozen bone snapping. The phone, Lily's anchor, didn't just break, it disintegrated. The screen imploded into a spiderweb of green and black lines, and then the whole thing just fell apart, the case turning to brittle shards, the gut spilling onto the floor like the organs of a dead thing. It was over in a second. Her last connection to this world, erased. Silence. The whirlwind was gone. The growl stopped. My fingers finally uncurled. The book dropped from my numb hand, landing on the floor with a soft thud. I could breathe again. I could move. It was done. Her anchor was gone. She was free. Both of them. And then I heard it. Her voice. Lily's. Not a shriek of metal this time. Not a scream from the dark. It was a child's thought, clear as a bell, spoken directly into the quiet center of my mind. It was filled with a sadness so deep it felt like a physical chill. Mom says you're a good person. My blood froze. You'll take care of me, right? May. Before I could even form a question, before I could scream N-O, a new feeling hit me. It started in my chest. A point of cold, like an injection of ice water directly into my heart. It didn't spread like the cold from the book. It was a hostile takeover. The cold plunged down my arms, into my legs. My vision swam. The room tilted on its axis. A weight settled inside me. It wasn't my own exhaustion. It wasn't my own fear. It was something else. Someone else. A small, cold, lonely space being carved out inside my own soul. Lily's spirit was no longer tied to the phone. It was unmoored. A ghost adrift. And her mother had just found her a new anchor. Me. No, I whispered, my voice a dry crackle. No. No. The feeling grew. It was a pressure behind my eyes, a passenger in my own body. I stumbled backward, tripping over a piece of broken wood, my legs giving out completely. I hit the floor hard, the impact jarring my teeth. My head swam. The edges of the world were turning gray. I tried to push myself up. My arms trembled, not from weakness, but from something else. A fight. My muscles were mine, but the command to move them felt distant, like it was coming from another room. I was losing connection. A puppeteer whose strings were being cut, one by one. My gaze fell on my own hand, splayed out on the dusty floor. It looked alien, foreign. I tried to make a fist. My fingers twitched, then lay still. A new thought, not my own, brushed against my mind. It was soft. Curious. It's cold in here, I finally screamed. A raw, ragged sound torn from my throat. I thrashed on the floor, a bug on a pin, but my movements were sluggish, clumsy, muted. I was fighting for control of my own nerves, my own muscles, and I was losing. The room stopped spinning. My breathing slowed, against my will. My panic was still there, a frantic bird beating its wings inside a cage. But the cage was getting smaller, thicker. Another presence was smoothing the edges, calming the storm, not out of kindness, out of a need for a quiet home. My body, my prison. I had to see, I had to know. Using every last shred of will I had left, I dragged myself across the floor. My nails scraped against the wood. Broken glass bit into my palms. I didn't feel it. I pulled myself toward the shattered window, toward the dim reflection in the largest remaining piece of glass. I got to my knees, shaking. I braced myself against the wall and looked. My own face stared back, pale, smeared with grime, eyes wide with a terror that was already starting to fade, replaced by a strange, placid emptiness. Blood trickled from a cut on my forehead. It was me, but I wasn't alone. Standing right next to my reflection, so close her shoulder was almost touching mine, was a little girl. A faint, shimmering outline of a child in a white dress, Lily. Her hand was raised, and in the reflection, her ghostly fingers were intertwined with my own. She was holding my hand. She looked up at my reflection, not at me, and a small, simple smile touched her lips. It wasn't a happy smile. It wasn't a sad smile. It was a smile of contentment. The look of a child who had finally come home. I collapsed. The last thing I heard before the darkness took me was a soft, childish sigh of relief, echoing not in the room but inside my own head. Months later, The city was different. The apartment was different. Clean walls, unbroken windows, a faint smell of new paint and bleach. I had left everything behind. The old apartment, the old job, the old life. I told the landlord there was a gas leak. I packed one bag and drove for 17 hours until the street names were no longer familiar. I was Mark again. Just Mark. An urban loner. Starting over. That's what I told myself. I sat in front of my laptop. The screen glowed in the dark room. I was trying to work, trying to code, trying to force my brain to think in lines and functions, a logic that had no room for ghosts. It was almost working. For hours at a time, I could almost forget. But the nights were the worst. I never slept in total darkness anymore. A lamp was always on in the corner. I checked the locks on the door 3 times before I went to bed. Then I would check them again. I avoided mirrors after sundown. I never let the apartment get too quiet, always leaving a TV or a podcast on, a constant low murmur of voices to fill the space, to make sure I was the only one there. Tonight was a bad night. The silence felt loud. The air was heavy. I couldn't focus. The lines of code blurred together. I rubbed my eyes, the familiar pressure building behind them. It was always there. A low hum of static at the back of my mind. A cold spot that never went away. Most days, I could ignore it. Push it down. Bury it under work and noise and motion. But some days, it pushed back. I closed the laptop. The silence of the room crashed down on me. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator. The distant siren of an ambulance miles away. My own breathing. Thump, 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 thump. My heart. It felt too slow, too calm. That's when I heard it. Click. It was a tiny sound, almost nothing. The sound of a fingernail tapping lightly on glass. It came from the window. I froze. My hands were flat on the cool metal of the laptop. I didn't turn around. I didn't breathe. My eyes were locked on the blank screen, on the dim outline of my own reflection. Don't look. It's the building settling. It's a branch in the wind. My new apartment was on the 15th floor. There were no trees. I squeezed my eyes shut. My heart was a frantic drum now. Please, not now. Please, not now. I recited street names, names of presidents, multiplication tables, anything to fill the space, anything to prove I was in control. Then I heard the giggle. It wasn't in the room. It wasn't from the window. It was right behind my ear. A soft, airy, childish laugh. A happy sound. The sound of a little girl playing a game of hide-and-seek. The sound of a daughter who was no longer lonely. My breath left my body in a single, silent rush. I didn't move. I couldn't. The muscles in my neck were locked. The static in my head bloomed, clearing for just a moment, and a single, final thought slid into my mind, as clear and simple as a line of perfect code. It wasn't my thought. It was hers. Found you. I closed my eyes. The loner wasn't alone anymore. He was never going to be alone again. I had a permanent roommate, a forever friend, and the horror was just getting started.